Om Karālavadhanam Ghoram Muktakeshim Chaturbhujam Kālikām Dakshinām Devyām Mundamala Vibhushitam Sadyaschina Shira Kadaga Vamadhurdva Karambujam Abhayam Varadam Chaiva Dakshinodvada Panikam Mahamegha Prabham Shyama Tata Chaiva Digambarim Kantavasakta Mundali Galadhrudira Charchitam Karnavatam Satanita Shavayugma Bhayanakam Ghoradam Stram Karalasyam Pino Natapayodharam Shravanam Karasaṅkhyātai Krita Kanchim Hasanmukim Srikkadvaya Galadrakta Dhara Vispuritananam Ghorarava Maharodrim Smashanalaya Vasinim Balarka Mandalakara Lochana Tritayanvitam Danturam Dakshina Vyapi Mukta Lambika Chochayam Shavarupa Mahadeva Hridayo Parisaṅsthitam Shivabhir Ghorarava-bhish Chaturdikshu Samanvitam Mahakalena cha samam Viparitarataturam Sukhak Prasanna Vadanam Smeranana Sarurvam Evam Sanchintayat Kālim Dharma Kamartha Mokshadam Dharma Kamartha Siddhidam. Om, the Divine Mother Kālī should be worshipped in this way. She should be meditated upon in this way for the attainment of righteousness, dharma, artha, meaning or wealth, kama, pleasure, and siddhi, spiritual empowerment, as well as moksha, liberation. I praise that terrifying one, Karala Vadanam Ghoram, who is awe-inspiring, whose hair is wild and free like a prostitute's, Mukta Keshi. She has 4 arms, Chaturbhuja. I worship and meditate upon that goddess, Kalika, who is the southward facing goddess. Salutations to Devī Dakshina Kali, who is garlanded in a garland of freshly severed heads, Mundamala Vibhushitam. In her upper left hand, she holds a sword, and in her lower left hand, she holds the head of a person. Sadyaschina Shira Kadaga Vamadhurdva Karambuja. In her upper right hand, she assures fearlessness, and with her lower right hand she offers boons. Abhayam Varadam Chaiva Dakshinodvada Panikam. She is black in color. Her skin is the color of a dark, splendorous storm cloud. Ahamegha Prabham Shyama. And she is utterly naked, clad in only the atmosphere. Tata Chaiva Digambarim. Kantavasakta Mundali Galadhrudira Charchitam. Her neck and body are anointed with the blood that drips from the garland of heads around her neck. Kantavasakta Mundali Galadhrudira Charchitam Karnavatam Satanita Shavayugma Bhayanakam. Her 2 ears are adorned with the corpses of infants. Ghoradam Stram Karalasyam Vinonata Payodharam. Her 2 fangs are fierce and terrifying, but her 2 breasts are full and comely, like a mother's. Shravanam Karasaṅkhyātai Krita Kanchim Hasanmukim Srikkadvaya Galadrakta Dhara Vispuritananam Ghorarava Maharodrim Smashanalaya Vasinim Balarka Mandalakara Lochana Tritayanvitam Danturam Dakshina Vyapi Mukta Lambika Chochayam Shavarupa Mahadeva Hridayo Parisaṅsthitam Shivabhir Ghorarava Chaturdikshu Samanvitam. Her girdle is made of dead man's hands. Her 2 lips are stained red with blood as she smiles sweetly. Blood trickles down the corners of her lips, framing her beautiful face. Her 3rd eye resembles the mandala or the circle of the freshly risen sun. She stands atop the chest of her husband Mahakala Bhairava, who is in the form of a corpse. All about her are jackals, howling, filling the directions with their shouts. She dwells in the cremation ground and roars, displaying her anger. And yet she is Hasanmukhi, intoxicated and joyful. This is the goddess who is ever eager to have union with her Lord Bhairava in the reverse position. Mahakala Kama Kula Kālī. She is ever pleased and quick to answer prayers. The Divine Mother Kali should be meditated upon in this way. Surapana matta subhakta nurakta lasatputa chitte sadhavir bhavatte japadhyana puja sudhadhau tapanka swarupam tvadiyam na vindanti deva swarupam tvadiyam na vindanti deva swarupam tvadiyam na vindanti deva Shamasva Paradha Mahagupta Bhavam Maya Loka Madhye Prakashikritam Yattava Dhyana Putena Chapalya Bhavat Swarupam Tvadiyam Na Vindanti Devaha Swarupam Tvadiyam Na Vindanti Devaha Swarupam Tvadiyam Na Vindanti Devaha Swarupam Tvadiyam Na Vindanti Deva. Intoxicated with liquor, you are inseparable from your sincere devotees, and you always shine in that pure heart which has been cleansed through the recitation of mantras, meditation, worship, and bliss. Even the gods don't know what you are. Ma, forgive me my transgression, for I have revealed in the marketplace of the world this great secret of your secret form. If I have done this, it is only because I have become guileless and childlike, having lost my mind in thinking constantly of you. Even the gods do not know what you are. Om. kṣepo jñānaṁ ca saṅkhyāṁ gatināda iti kramāt kallanāṁ kurvatī Kālī karṣiṇīty abhidhīyate. Kālī is that resonant, dynamic one from whom the world is projected outward, articulated and known, and into whom it is reabsorbed in a constant simultaneity of unfolding. Evam adho eva Shakti, spandana shila, bahir vishayonmukhi. Verily, she is that primordial pulsation inclined towards externality. Vyapini bhavena shrishti upadesha bhajanam. She is Vyapini, that all-pervasive bhajanam, vessel or receptacle, in which all creation arises, in which all wisdom is attained. Ekaiva chinnila dhava bhasa rupa. She alone is that pure awareness in which shines experiences like the color of deep blue, etc. Astira hatta gavati kulaiva paschat pratisanghata swabhava. Astira, she is absolutely unsteady. She is not at all grounded. Astira, she is dynamic, in other words. Hatta, she is forcefully, gavati, moving. She is dynamic and forcefully flowing into externality. She is verily Kula, the embodied universe. Kulaiva paschat. And yet, afterwards, paschat, she withdraws it back into her nature. Pratisanghata svabhava. Soyam nirupadho chit svayad upadikrito bhedaha. Her spontaneous nature is found at the very edge of any experience. Duality arises in her when there are limiting adjuncts, but in truth, she shines non-differently as pure non-dual consciousness. Shiva svabhavaiva shaktihi na vastvantaram. Ityekameva Shiva vyapadeshyam Shakti vyapadeshyam cha vastu tattvam na purvam kinchit. The essential nature of Shiva is Shakti. There is no other reality. That which is called Shiva and that which is called Shakti is one and the same thing. And what's more, this reality is not extraordinary. It is not transcendent. It is wholly ordinary and present and inherent in each and every mundane experience. Om Vithagnir Dahika Shakti Rama Krishna Sthita Hiya Sarva Vidya Swarupam Tam Saradam Pranamamyam. Oh, I bow to that goddess Paravak, the supreme word, Paravach, the supreme speech, constantly articulating herself in each and every moment as the Trinity, the Trika of knower, knowing, known, para, 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 and apara. I praise that goddess in whom abides all wisdom, in whom appears Kālī, Tara, Shodashi, Bhuvaneshwari, Bhairavi, Chinnamastaka, Dhumavati, and Bagala. I praise that Sarada Devī, the Shakti of Sri Ramakrishna, by which all his works are accomplished. Peace, peace, peace. Enjoy more. So we're about 45 minutes late to our lecture, but I wanted to show you the worship of the Panchadasha yoginīs first, because tonight I want to talk about these 15 Kālīs. They are cremation ground spirits, they're dakinīs, they're yoginīs, and as you saw, they're depicted in a rather terrific kind of way. So they're all very mortuary in nature, like they're icons, they're representative anthropomorphic forms, usually will represent some kind of like Scorpio energy, if you will, for lack of a better word. There are weapons like swords and severed heads and tridents. Sometimes they're holding out a threatening finger like this. So many of them are quite angry. Many of them are screaming, howling. They're quite terrific. And many of them are also drunk. They're like mahonmata, supremely intoxicated, and also chanchala, very unsteady, unstable. You don't know what's going to happen when you call them in, as it were. And they're, in a sense, very krodha, very chanda, very ugra, fierce, angry, etc. So they're depicted like that. So you might wonder, why would anybody want to interact with such cremation ground energies? Why would anybody want to voluntarily and willingly contact these yoginīs and these dakinīs? They're known as the Panchadasha yoginīs, and so we'll explore why there are 15 of them. And we'll make a few arguments from within the Sri Vidya tradition, within the Kali Kula, within the Dakshinamnaya mainly, about why there should be 15 yoginīs. And we'll think of them in terms of the 15 kalas, the 15 days of the moon, with Kali representing the Nitya Shodashi, Nitya meaning eternal, and Shodashi meaning 16. So she is the Nitya Kala, the eternal phase of the moon, which is no phase, but is the ground in which all the phases come and go, the waxing and the waning moon. So we'll think about it in that way. But mainly I want to offer you the Kaula explanation of, I said Kulla as in the deity, Kulla. And of course, Kulla, Kaula. We can think of this embodied way of thinking about things. So we'll talk about her also as the 5 organs of perception, the 5 organs of action, and the pancha pranas. So all these various energies, we have to ask, why are they depicted in this way? Anthropomorphically, iconically, artistically, I guess you could say, symbolically even, they're depicted as rather fierce. And so we have to ask why. Like, what's so fierce about them? What's so scary about them? After all, if they are my own energies, if they are my own potencies and faculties and powers, why should they be depicted in such an awful and terrifying way? So hopefully we can answer that question and make an appeal to a sort of Kaula reading of the 15 yoginis. So I want to talk about the 15 yoginis as emanations of Mother Kali, but I also want to talk about the mātrikās. So the mātrikās are another set of goddesses. There are about 8 of them, sometimes 7. So there's a Sapta Mātrika system. And the Sapta Mātrika system might actually be the more ancient system, because there are references in the Veda, in the Mundaka Upanishad, to these 7 yoginis. They are depicted as 7 tongues of flame, if you will. So the Sapta yoginis, ultimately we come to think of them also as the Ashta Mātrikās, the 8 mothers, and they rule over the power of speech and articulation and language, if you will, which is so very important in this context, for reasons we will get into in just a few moments. So they're the Ashta Mātrikās. And I mean, you probably already heard this, but the Ashta Mātrikās, each of them preside over another set of 7 deities each. So each set of Ashta Mātrikās is a set of 8 deities. The presiding deity, the main mother, if you will, like Brahmi, Maheshwari, Vaishnavi, Kaumari, like that. The names change from tradition to tradition, but basically there are 8 main ones, but under the 8 main ones, there are 7 emanations. So that means there are 8 sets of 8, that gives us 64. There's also a set of yoginis known as the 64 yoginis. So we can think of them as 15, or 16. We can think of them as 7 or 8, or we can think of them as 64. But then also, importantly, we have to ask this question: what is the relationship between these various sets of deities or emanations or energies to Kali, the one in which they all appear and in which they all inhere. So Kālī, the goddess Kālī, that cremation ground goddess, who we call Dakshina Kālī, how is she related to these emanations of hers? Like, what are the yoginīs to her? What are the mātrikas to her? What are the asatanga, the ashtabhairavas to her? Like, what are the 8 bhairavas to her? And we can think of the mātrikas as being in these like pairs with the ashtabhairavas. So they're like pairs of consorts. Mātrikas and Ashtabhairavas. And a set of other Bhairavis also, and yoginīs and dakinis. There are some like animal-headed yoginīs. Some of them are not just anthropomorphic, they're also zoanthropomorphic. And so there's a lot to get into here, and all of this stuff is pretty esoteric, but deeply, deeply meaningful in terms of philosophy also. So in tonight's discussion, I want to do 3 things. One, I want to ask this question. Is there really any difference between Shiva and Shakti? Because a lot of people say, oh, I'm a Śakta, or some people say, oh, I'm a Shaiva, and then they act as if these are 2 different categories. And we just said that Shiva Swabhava Eva Shaktihi, that Shiva's essential nature is Shakti. Na vastva antaram. There is no reality apart from this yamala, this union of Shiva and Shakti. And it's not even a union, that's just like describing it poetically in a way that we can understand. So we often think of Shiva and Shakti as being an eternal sexual union. It's called yamala. So she's seated atop his lap like that, like in the Yab-Yum Buddha style, or he's lying down and she's seated on top of him. And this image of Shakti or Kālī in sexual intercourse with Shiva is depicting the fact that they are not 2, that they're one, that they're eternally joined in ecstatic union. Actually, this is called Yamala. So Shiva, Shakti, Yamala. Here we can see that the essence of Shiva is Shakti. So we're going to make a claim, and the claim is as follows. There is no difference between Shiva and Shakti, and I hope to prove that philosophically in a few different ways. I'm going to make arguments based on, of course, logic and reasoning. This is called sattarka. But also mainly I'm going to appeal to the scriptures. So I'm going to point you to some texts within the Tāntrik tradition, particularly within the Maharta tradition, the tradition of Mother Kālī within Śaivism, and show you the words of great masters like Abhinava Gupta and Shittikanta and whatnot. And you'll see that there, emphatically again and again and again, they're trying to remind us in various works like the Tantra Loka or in the Mahanaya Prakasha, like that there is no difference between Shiva and there is no difference between Shiva and Shakti. Like you can't think that you're a Shaiva without worshipping Shakti, and I think you can't think that you're a Shakta without worshipping Shiva, because those 2 words are pointing to the same thing. And we'll try to argue for that. So I'll talk a little bit about Shiva and Shakti and their relationship. But the second thing I want to do, and I think this is maybe even more important, I want to ask this question. Once we've established the relationship between Shiva and Shakti, who then is Kālī? Like, what's Kālī in relation to Shakti? What do we mean when we say the word Kālī? And you'll see Kālī is one of the most mysterious words in the Shaiva tradition. She is so inscrutable, so subtle, and so philosophically refined that Abhinava Gupta, the great Shaiva teacher, the great master of the Tāntrik tradition, chooses to call her Anakya Kālī, meaning the nameless one, the indecipherable one, the inexplicable one, the infinitely mysterious one. Guyati Guya. She is the secret of all secrets. She is the most secret. And often the things that are most secret, we like to hide them in plain sight. So the thing about Kālī is she's not hidden. She's very obvious. In fact, we just heard from Shrittikanta, Cha vastu tattvam na purvam kinchit. She's not something exotic in that sense. She's not bizarre or extraordinary even. The most bizarre thing about this, the most extraordinary thing about all of this, the most incomprehensible and indecipherable and befuddling, confounding fact about all of this is that in each and every moment we are confronting her. She's always shining forth in every single experience as the trinity of knower, knowing, and known. And hopefully we can try to show that that's the case. So we'll think of Kālī in the most exalted, non-dual way, if you will. So I want to ask that question. Who is Kālī? And again, we'll take up some arguments. We'll use sattarka reasoning, and we'll make an appeal to the scripture, to sad-agama, and we'll see what the masters have to say about Kālī, particularly Abhinava Gupta. There's a particular phrase that Abhinava Gupta offers us about Mother Kālī, and it's kind of like based on Panini's grammar. So in the Sanskrit language, you can understand what words mean by looking at their dhatus, their roots. And the beauty of the Sanskrit language is that the dhatu, the root of a word, can mean many, many, many different things. So for instance, the word deva or Devī god or goddess has many different roots, at least like 6 different explanations. There's one root, div, and that root can be understood in like at least 6 different ways. So you can think of the deva, the divinity, as like the shining one. But you can also think of it as the playful one, if you will. So krida is one of the meanings of the root in the word deva, God. So the playful, shining one is God. Like that, you can do this kind of etymology with each and every Sanskrit word. So when we take the word Kālī to understand what that word means, we can appeal to grammar actually. We can look to Panini and we can see how he defines that root, Kal. And we can see that its application is quite extensive. It's the one who kṣepana. Kṣepa means to throw out or to project. It also means jñānaṁ, cognition or knowledge. It also means saṅkhyāṁ, to count or to delimit or to identify. It means gati, to move. You know, the word Kālī or Kal means dynamism. It also means nada, which means sound or resonance. The word that was with God, the word that was God, like that. And also, it refers to sequence. But this is where things get very interesting, because the moment I say sequence, I'm already invoking the concept of time. So when I say krama, the word krama in Sanskrit means sequence, we often think of it in terms of like a temporal sequence. So event A, then event B, then event C, and then event D. So the unfolding of A through to D, and maybe the reverse process of D through to A is often conceived of as being temporal in nature. And in one sense, we mean that, but we're also talking about a simultaneity here. So it's a krama that is akrama, a sequence that is also simultaneous. So there's a paradox there. But this unfolding of the universe, which happens simultaneously, this is also one of the definitions of the root kal from Kālī. Or Kālī from Kal, rather. And then there's another thing, kallanāṁ. So this is interesting. She who imagines. So as in kalpana. Kalpana is a beautiful word. It means to visualize or to imagine or to think about stuff. And so you can think that this entire universe is an imagination in Mother Kāli's mind. It's a visualization. It's a poetic conception. It's an artistic thought, if you will. So Kālī is kalpana, to imagine, to visualize. Then I love this one, kurvatī. This implies dynamism, the one who acts. And then I think this is my favorite though. Kālī, the black one, or time, is the one who karṣiṇīty, she devours. So her name is Kālī karṣiṇīty or Kālī saṅkhyāṁ. So these are some more esoteric names that we find in the tradition. So it's not just Kālī, it's Kālī kala saṅkhyāṁ or Kālī kala saṅkhyāṁ, the one who devours both time and space. So saṅkhyāṁ or kṣira, like this idea of devouring. That's the main thing here. And by devouring, there's a very profound and subtle philosophical concept being invoked here. The one who devours is really the one who reabsorbs. So she, therefore, then can be described as that resonant, dynamic reality, or rather that resonant, dynamic void from whom the world is projected outward, in whom the world is articulated in order for it to be known, and into whom it is reabsorbed in a constant simultaneity of unfolding. So, iti abhidhīyate. Abhidhīyate means it's like a definition. So iti, this is the definition of Kālī. So this is what Kālī is. She who projects, she who knows, she who delimits, she who vibrates, she who is resonance or dynamism, she who is the process, she who imagines, she who acts, she who devours. This is verily Kālī. And then we can, of course, look at what Kālī is according to Shittikanta and the Mahanaya Prakasha. We can look at Maheshwarananda, a great South Indian priest in the Chidambaram temple, and how he explained Kālī within the context of the Maharta or the Mahanaya traditions. So having said all of that, that's maybe the main course for tonight. So we'll start with this question. How is Shiva related to Shakti? What's the link between Shiva and Shakti? Are they really different things? And is there such a thing as a Shiva who is not a Shakta? And is there such a thing as a Shakta who is not a Shiva? I'm going to say yes and no. There is one way, there is one sense in which you can distinguish these two things, and I might make some historical points as to how you can delineate one from the other. But I think philosophically, this doesn't hold up to reason, and it doesn't hold up to tradition either. It doesn't hold up to the understanding of the masters of the tradition. I think it's only valid insofar as we of limited intellect want to argue with one another. And it's only valuable insofar as we want a kind of us versus them narrative. So if I'm like, I'm over here and I'm a Śakta because I worship Devī, and you're over there because you're Shiva, because you're stuck in your puritanical, smarta, Brahmanical, like patriarchal god structures, then fine. I'll be a Shakti and you'll be a Shiva. And then vice versa. The Shaivas are like, what? You're worshipping Shakti without Shaktiman? You're worshipping power without the holder of power? How can you worship dynamism without the static, absolute stillness? How can you pray to sound without the space, the void in which that sound resonates? How can you take Shakti without Shiva? And then like this, we fools argue with one another as to whether we are Shaivas or Shaktas or whatnot. And you'll see that philosophically, this probably won't work. Philosophically, Shaivas and Shaktas, we're talking about the same thing, and the theology is the same, the ritual technologies are the same. So, in terms of theory, or in other words, in terms of theology, and in terms of practice, in terms of ritual, in terms of religion, in terms of lifestyle, these two are exactly the same because the terms Shiva and Shakti are actually synonyms. Just like the words kumbha and gata are synonyms, pot can be said to be, there's many different words for something, like say, snake. The other day, actually, I was at the Ratha Yatra, the Lord Jagannath, the people at ISKCON, they host a very big Yatra festival out on Venice Beach. It's actually wonderful. And a friend of mine lives in Vrindavana, and she's very high up in like that ISKCON hierarchy. She was like singing kirtanas in Srila Prabhupada's room, like she's like very up there, she lives in Vrindavan and all, but even she flies out once a year to come to Venice Beach to attend this Rath Yatra. There's something very special about Rath Yatra in California, and there's something very special about Lord Jagannath also, because in the Jagannath temple at Puri, there you find Vimala Devi, the goddess. It's also a Shakta Pita. So you can see there's no real sense in which we can distinguish Lord Jagannatha Krishna from Devi or from Shakti, from Shiva or from Kali, in a very theological, philosophical, and practical religious sense. These are all various names for the same reality. And hopefully, in the course of this talk, we can acquaint ourselves, like actually, to some extent, this might be possible, with what that reality is. So we aren't just like saying it. You know how we always say, like, oh, these are all names that represent the same thing. Hare, we don't even know what that thing is. So this is just like a cheap thing to say. I mean, it's true. Ekam sat vipra bahuda vadanti. It's true. The reality is one, though people in different places at different times call it by different names. But can we really say that with conviction until we have some sense, at least philosophically, at least intellectually, at least conceptually, about what this kind of reality we're talking about is like? So we'll first have to understand that reality, and then hopefully we can see with piercing clarity that what is meant by the word Shiva is exactly what is meant by the word Shakti. But anyway, the point I was trying to make is I was at the Ratha Yatra, and there was a young girl who came up to me holding a snake. It was so charming. She had a snake wrapped around her neck. So naturally, I was very attracted to that. And so we were like talking about snakes and whatnot. And then she said, oh, and then she asked me, how do you say snake in your language? So I started giving her like various Sanskrit words for snake. And she also told me all the various words that she knew. Surprisingly, I had opted for using Sanskrit, but my native tongue is Tamil and Malayalam, and she was able to say what snake was in Tamil. She said, Pambu. I was like, hey, how did you know it's Pambu? She just learned all of this from her time as like a snake act on Venice Beach, I guess. Anyway, so we were talking about this idea of synonyms. So I was giving a few different synonyms for snake, like Shesha or Bhujanga or Sarpa or something like that. And I was explaining to her that these are all different words that mean the same thing. Naga, Shesha, Sarpa, etc. And it's exciting to think about how one thing can be called by different sounds, and yet no one gets confused about what's being called out to. So if I say Sarpa, and if someone else says, I don't know, Shesha, and you were a Sanskrit speaker, you would know that we were both talking about a snake. Those words, although they sound different, although they're spelled differently, they point to the same reality. Why do we know this? Why do we know that the word Shesha and the word Sarpa mean the same thing? Well, because we know what a snake is. We've encountered a snake in the world. And so, having encountered the reality called snake, we are no longer confused by the various words that depict it. So, having understood, at least theoretically, that's the goal for today's lecture, what Kali is, maybe we can understand better why it is that the word Shiva and the word Shakti are synonyms. So Abhinava Gupta says it most dramatically and most stunningly in the Tantra Loka. He says, Kumbhas gatas cheti tathaiva bhanyate. Maheshwara Oh. Maheshvara sarvam idam jagatyang jagate. This sarvam idam, this universe, this world, and Lord Shiva, Maheshwara, God and this world, spirit and matter. These two things are synonyms, the way the word kumbha and the word gata are both synonyms for the same thing, pot. Kumbha gatas cheti tathaivate banyate, something like that. I forgot the verse. But in Tantra Loka, Abhinava Gupta points this out. He's appealing to the idea of synonyms. So we're going to hopefully prove in the course of this discussion, through reasoning and through an appeal to scripture, this idea that Shiva and Shakti are one, and we'll do it by trying to understand what it is we mean by the word Kālī. I'm going to say Kālī is the word that I use to describe the yamala, the union of Shiva and Shakti. Kālī is the word that I use to describe consciousness imbued with infinite powers of willing, knowing, and doing. That ultimate absolute reality, which is dynamic and which appears in every moment as the sum total of all experienced entities and experiencing beings, that totality, which is at once immanent, Vishvamaya, and also Vishva Utirana, which is also transcendent, that reality we call Kālī. And having understood that, we can come to the last part of the discussion, which I think many of you will be interested in. I want to talk about the various sadhanas that we as a Shaiva community, as a Tantric community, have been doing in the cremation grounds since the inception of our tradition. Now, this is a story I've told many a time in many lecture contexts. It's a wonderful story of like spiritual adventure. It's a story of a group of people who were bold enough to pursue God in their own way, to like give up all institutions and all structures and honestly quest after the divine in a way that was authentic to them. They followed their heart, their inspiration, and their devotion way more than they followed the rules. And so this is a story of some spiritual badassery. It's a story of some rebels, some punks, some spiritual rock stars, and we call them the Ati Margins or the Mahavratins or the Kalamukas, or later we call them the Kapalikas or the Yogini Kula, like we call them various things. But again, they're all words that refer to something that happened within the context of Shaiva Tantra. And it happened in the smashan. There was an innovation. We discovered something when we were worshipping Rudra or worshipping Shiva in the smashan. What did we discover there? Well, we discovered Kālī. Again, we say Shiva Swabhavaha iti Shakti. So imagine these early practitioners were meditating on Shiva, and just imagine that in doing that, they touched something, which was the beating heart of Shiva, something that was at the essence of this reality called Shiva. They were able to understand this reality more subtly, and that gave them access to the Kālī Kula. And so traditions like the Kula or the Kaula, traditions like Krama, all of that can be traced back to these revelations that were had by individuals in the early parts of our history and that are continue to be had all over the world, not necessarily in cremation grounds, but in living rooms, in ashramas, all over the world, not just in Manikarnika Ghat or what have you. So the last thing I want to do tonight, if I can get through this preamble and actually do the things that I'm setting out to do, the last thing I want to do tonight is explore a historical narrative. I want to tell you a story about how we discovered Kālī, or how Kālī appeared to us, or how she made her presence known, and what that means in terms of sadhana. So we can explore some of the more Kaula-oriented types of practice. And I want to make this point. It's a point that I've been contemplating for some time now, and it's a point about tradition and about transmission. So it's very possible that the Kālī we are talking about in our communities is more to do with the Dakshinamnaya than with the Uttaramnaya. Now, Kālī, when we think about Kālī, we think that this is the northern transmission from Vamadeva, one of the 5 heads of Lord Shiva. And in truth, what Abhinava Gupta is talking about, what Kshemaraja and what Jayarata are referring to when they talk about Kālī, very likely is this Uttaramnaya, Kālī Krama, Kālī Kula kind of deity, Guhya Kālī, if you will. But it is also possible that there is a way to think about Kālī within the Dakshinamnaya too. So this is the revelation of Aghora Shiva. So Aghora is one of the 5 heads of Lord Shiva. Vamadeva is another head of Lord Shiva. So from Vamadeva's mouth comes the agamas relating to Mother Kālī. It's called the Uttaramnaya, or also it's sometimes transcended by the Urdhvamnaya. But there's also a transmission called the Southern transmission. So the word Dakshina Kālī, Southern Kālī, or the Kālī of the South, or the southward facing Kālī, might actually refer to an understanding of Kālī that is more indigenous, to the Dakshinamnaya, then to the Uttaramnaya. And this is just a conjecture. I'm just going to play with the idea with you for a little while. Honestly, all the amnayas blend into one another. Tantra is Tantra, Agamas are Agamas, and Shakti is Shakti. Kālī is Kālī is Kālī is Kālī. So we'll try to define what that word is, and you'll see that when it comes to transmission, when it comes to schools, like we shouldn't make that much of a difference between one school and another. Obviously, there are many traditions within Tantra, many orientations within Tantra, but they're almost all of them goddess-oriented. So if you say, okay, Dakshinamnaya is the worship of Lalita Tripura Sundari, Uttaramnaya is the worship of Kālī, Paschimamnaya is the worship of Kubjika Mata, and Purvamnaya is the worship of Para or Vak Devi. You'll see that these are all just, again, synonyms. They're arguably different ways of approaching the same thing, which tonight hopefully we'll encounter, at least in philosophical terms. And that thing is called Shakti. And she's no thing, actually. She's power. She's instrumentality, pure potentiality or latency, and she's inseparable from Shiva. Naumi Devīm Sharirastham Nrityato Bhairava Kritehe. She is that Devi who abides in my very own body. I praise that goddess who is the energy in the dance of Lord Shiva, the energy by which Lord Shiva is able to dance at all. So we're talking about the goddess, we're talking about Kundalini, and we're talking about you. And that reality which you are, that dynamic stillness, that radiant void, that can be called various things. Lalita Tripura Sundari in the Agora transmission, or the Dakshinamnaya, Kālī or Guhya Kālī in the Uttaramnaya, or Kubjika Mata in the Paschimamnaya, Paradevi in the Purvamnaya. Like, you can say all of these different words, but I hope that at the end of this lecture, it might be possible to argue that these are just inflections on the same sentence, different inflections of the same sentence. And what is that sentence? Tattvamasi, that thou art, or Jai Ma, or something like that. These are just different accents when we say the same thing. So I'm going to say, just for fun, that at the end, I'll save this for the end of the lecture, but I'm going to offer this thesis or this just conjecture. We're not going to develop it too much today. But I'm going to offer that maybe Ma Kālī, the Kālī that we talk about, is native to places like Gauradesh, meaning Bengal, and places like Kerala. Of course, it comes to me through that Malayali Kerala stream mainly, because my mother's side of the family, they're all Malayalis. And so it was in interacting with the Kerala communities in Kerala and also in other places that we come to know something about Amman, something about Pechi Amman and various other forms of Ma, you know. But you can see that this Amman or this Kālī is worshipped in a particular way in Kerala. And also, she's worshipped in a particular way in Bengal. It's called Gaudiya Shaktism. Just as there is Gaudiya Vaishnavism, Bengali Vaishnavism, there's also Gaudiya Shaktism. And this is a very important thing because Gauda or Bengal is very close to Assam, which is also very close to like Tibet and to like Burma and to China. And so it's a very multicultural sort of thing. And because of the cosmopolitanism, because of the globalization in this corner of India, you saw a lot of innovation. Just like in Kashmir, we see a lot of innovation because Kashmir is all the way up there in the northwest and it's like connected to the Silk Road and to Central Asia. So similarly, in Kerala, it's a coastal kind of thing. It's in the west and it's like there's a coast and therefore there's a lot of trade and a lot of interaction with the outside world. And this will always, I think, have a positive effect on philosophy, on art, on spirituality. So these are places of supreme like innovation. And it's in these places, I think, that Kālī most likes to appear. That's why I love Los Angeles. In fact, me and Tāntrik ji and I were in the back of an Uber yesterday talking about this. We were in Hollywood and we're just like looking around at LA and we were thinking about Los Angeles and thinking about how it so much mirrors Srinagar or Kalighat or I don't know, like Madurai Meenakshi in Tamil Nadu or Cochin or something like that. Like these are all places where various cultures, or otherwise known as various streams of thought, all collided kind of forcefully and kind of cataclysmically, and nobody really knows who they are or where they stand. So everyone is standing in between traditions. You don't know if you're Irish or if you're Scottish or if you're French or if you're Hungarian. You don't know if you're a Śakta or a Shaiva or a Muslim or a Sufi or a Christian or some Pentecostal variant that's somehow related to Tibetan Buddhism. You don't know where you stand in all of this. And that's just what Mother likes. She is the deity of the liminal space. She's a marginal deity that rules over marginalized people. And so it's no surprise that the Romani people like gravitated towards her so readily. I mean, you can make arguments like they came from northwestern India. Obviously, the Romani people, their heritage is Indian. And so you could argue that they brought their Durga Puja with them, they brought Devī with them into Europe. But it's also arguably the case that when they got to Europe, they saw a mother in the form of the Virgin Mary, and they immediately adopted her as their patron saint, but she very quickly became black. So this Romani deity, the black goddess, rules over disenfranchised people, nomadic people, people whose cultures are a conglomerate of various different streams. And this is what it was like in Kerala. It was what it was like in Madurai Meenakshi. It was certainly what it was like in Kashmir, in Srinagar, one of the wealthiest places in India at that time. And of course, this is what Gaura Desh is like. So it's kind of interesting to me that the way that we tie our saris in Bengal and in Kerala are is uncannily similar. So the way saris are tied, there's like a link there actually between the fashion sense of these two places. Also, it's really interesting that these two places are like fish eating places. So much of India is vegetarian. I mean, not really, because of big Muslim and Christian populations, and even many among the Hindu populations will eat meat. Like my family, we grew up eating meat. I chose to be vegetarian when I was 16, but like my family was not a vegetarian family. They were Pillays, and Pillay is a Malayali name. Kshatriyas, they were just, meat was a part of their culture. And every year we would do a kind of puja, Pitri puja, for my grandfather on my Kerala side, my Malayali grandfather. And it's such a beautiful puja because there's like a picture of him, and you wave the incense, you give some pindas, like the rice cakes. But also, you would prepare something that this person likes, something that they would have enjoyed if they were still embodied. So, Acha, or my grandfather on my mother's side, Mr. Marimuthu Pillai, he would receive a glass of scotch. He was very fond of his whiskey, and my grandmother would cook him like his favorite dishes, which were usually some kind of mutton varaval, or some kind of chicken curry or something like that. So Kerala food, Malayali food. But he was eating meat and he enjoyed his cigarettes and he enjoyed his whiskey. And that wasn't weird because he's not a Brahmana. He's a Kshatriya. And as a Kshatriya, he doesn't have to subscribe to Brahmanic codes of conduct. But arguably, in India, there's this sort of tyranny of the sages, if you will, where there's this kind of puritanical smarta Brahmanism that spreads all over. And then, like, now there's a sense that if you're not vegetarian, you're not pure or something like that. That's a very interesting idea. In any case, even when people are vegetarian, though, there are some exceptions to the rule. Like, for instance, Brahmins, who are quite vegetarian in most parts of India, they might be okay with eating a little bit of fish in Bengal. Like you saw Holy Mother, fish was a big part of her diet. And Sri Ramakrishna also, he would eat fish. He wouldn't eat eggs. He wouldn't eat chicken. Sometimes at a certain time in his life, he could only touch the goat curry to his tongue because by his own admission, he was not able to eat the goat curry anymore. But he was surprised by that. He confessed to the devotees. He was like, "What's this state of mind? I can't bear the touch of meat. Like I can't eat meat, but I touch it to my tongue just so mother won't get angry. All the meat that's offered to Kali, he like will touch it to his tongue just so he can symbolically consume the prasad, because mother is offered goat curry and various other things. And he would say things like, "Oh, like he didn't eat eggs, and they didn't eat land animals like chicken, but they would probably eat fish." And that's true in Kerala also. So even the most vegetarian members of society, some of them would actually not consider fish non-vegetarian. This sounds like a weird thing for me to be harping on for so long, but it's again another uncanny similarity, in my opinion, between Bengal and between Kerala. So there's Kali in Kerala and there's Kali in Bengal, and both of these places tie their saris in a very similar way. They're both like multicultural, cosmopolitan places. They're both very close to the water, not just to trade, but to the water. Yeah, absolutely. You can eat whatever you want. Sri Ramakrishna said, "Blessed is he who thinks of God day and night, though he eats pork. And a wretch is he who, although he eats the most vegetarian of foods, is always thinking worldly thoughts and judging everyone and feeling bitter and whatnot." So you can eat whatever you like. But now this is an important point. that comes with the terrain with Kali, because she is she's Vamakshi. She's like always interested in reversing roles and transgressing structures and institutions. But it's just something to note that even within like Brahmanical, Smarta institutions, there's some fish eating in Kerala and in Bengal. Now, I'm not making a case for fish eating or for meat eating or anything like that. I'm just pointing to a fact, I think, a cultural fact about clothing and about food and about geography and about trade. And I'm just like thinking about how these things connect to this other fact that these are the two centers of the worship of Mother Kali, at least in the sense that we talk about. So Gaura Desh, Bengal, or Kerala Desh, Kerala, Malayalam, these are two places in which Mother, and specifically Kali, is worshipped and in which the theologies and practices of Mother Kali are developed. But also in Tamil Nadu, in the Tamil heartland, there's a place in the coast also called Madurai Meenakshi. And this is, of course, a very important Śakta temple. And we know that Sri Vidya has a very, 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 very unbelievably big influence in the south, especially in Tamil Nadu. So it's like the headquarters of Sri Vidya is in Tamil Nadu. Of course, Telugu Brahmanas, Malayali Brahmanas, like many of them are also versed in Sri Vidya because all over the south you have this strong Lalita Tripura Sundari presence. But also in Kashmir, like the Vamakeshwari Mata, a very important text in the tradition, was composed in Kashmir. So in Kashmir, Srinagar, and in Tamil Nadu, you also have a link, which I think is interesting. So it's almost like this like cross between Kerala and Bengal, between Tamil Nadu and between Kashmir. But I think the observations that we can make about these things, geography and culture and history and whatnot, is also true for our modern world. The very same forces that allowed Kali to thrive in those environments in the past are here now in our very cosmopolitan cities. Those of us who find that we are outcasts, those of us who find that we don't belong, and that's frankly speaking all of us in this very confusing time in which all familiar structures are dissolving. We come to Kali because however we like to think of her, she, like for the Romani people, is the patron saint, patron mother, the goddess, if you will, of liminality, of marginality, of ambiguity, and more importantly, of freedom, because she cannot be defined. She is that power by which things are defined. She herself cannot be defined. So I think if you find yourself in this sort of indefinite, culturally, spiritually, and religiously, maybe even geographically confusing space, good. It makes sense. And it's perfect for the worship of Ma Kali, who transgresses and goes beyond all such conventions. Okay, so having said that, I'm going to offer at the end of this lecture, I just want to say it now in case I forget, but I'm going to offer at the end of this lecture a few different interpretations of the name Dakshina Kali. So having defined Kali, we can go on to talk about Dakshina Kali, the specific form that we worship in our parampara. There are many forms of Kali, Guhya Kali, Siddhi Kali, Mahakali, Smashana Kali, so many different forms of Kali, Rakta Kali, Nitya Kali, but we specifically have a penchant for worshipping Dakshina Kali. And so we should ask, what does that mean? What does the word dakshina mean? I think we can do many different kinds of etymologies here. We can read the word dakshina in a few different ways. But in one way, I'm going to suggest that it means the Kali of the South, maybe, South Indian Kali. That's one way we can understand it. And there's a beautiful prayer. Tenadudeya Shivane Potram, Tenadudeya Shivane Potri, Enatavarkum Ireva Potri. I praise that Lord Shiva, who is the southward facing one, or the god of the south. But of course, we have in mind Dakshinamurti. But then in what sense is Dakshinamurti related to Dakshina Kali? That's another link I want to explore. So we'll explore the word Dakshina in terms of like the Himalayas. We'll explore it in the terms of like Dakshina as in boon or as in gift or as in blessing, but also as in the southward facing one, the one who conquers death by facing and staring down Yamaraj, who dwells in the south. All of that. Let's look at the word Kali, but then finally let's look at the word Dakshina Kali. So I think ultimately this whole talk is about who is Kali? And in what sense is she the same as Shiva? Okay. And you might be wondering, where does all the Panchadasha Yogini, Ashtamatrika stuff fit in? We actually did give a talk on just the Ashtamatrikas. So the Matrikas themselves are such a loaded and subtle and profound philosophical inquiry into linguistic mysticism. Like what's the relationship between language and reality, between sound and the absolute, like the Shabda Brahmavada, the four levels of speech, Vaikari, Madhyama, Pashanti, Para, like all those terms imported into the tradition from Bhatrahari, from the Vakya Padiya, from Panini and the Ashtadhyayi, and like all those things we've talked about in other lectures. So this won't be as exhaustive as that. So if you're interested in the Mātrikās, there are lectures that we've given on the Mātrikās specifically, and you can refer to those. Also, there are talks that we gave on the Panchadasha yoginīs. Um, Maybe I'll find them and link them in the description of this video when I upload it. But those lectures are specifically for the study of these 8 yoginīs and these 15 yoginīs and whatnot. Today, I'm just going to mention them and try to contextualize them within the history or within the context of the cremation ground practitioners of early Shaivism or early Tantra. Okay, so that's the roadmap. Are you ready? Let's plunge in. Before we do that, though, I have 3 announcements. I want to get them out of the way now because I think I'm definitely going to forget. So 3 announcements for the community, and then we'll start on the lecture. The first announcement is I'm so excited to tell you that we're all going to be convening in Boulder, Colorado for a retreat in Kuleshwari's house. So as you know, like our big project is to get together in person more often. So Kuleshwari, do you want to tell people about it? I don't know. It's better that you invite them because it is your home with Andrew G. So like maybe you should.
Right. So we still haven't solidified dates as far as I know. But we're looking at
Wait,
August,
27th though, right? 27th to 31st?
which is 20, so you're staying the whole time. So, like,
I'm moving in, girl. No,
oh
yeah,
my
I'm
God,
staying the whole time.
please stay. I'm just gonna like make sure that like, yeah, we just don't get you back to the airport. But anyways, yeah, you guys are all invited. So 27th is my birthday, but it's not a big deal. Anyways, we're celebrating through the 31st. So that's Sunday, right? For some reason, I thought you were coming up just for the weekend. So I was like, whatever that Friday, Saturday, Sunday is. But yeah, so everyone's invited. And we're just in Broomfield, Colorado. So we're right between Boulder and Denver. We're thinking about doing just some time up in the mountains for Homa and Puja. Obviously, there's the Shiva Sai Mandir temple in Denver, which is just down the road from us, so 20 minutes. So Ruth Ma is here, and she's also excited just to see everybody. So, oh, and this is Andrew. This is my partner.
Hello.
A lot of you haven't met him, but he's yeah, he's very down with the practice. I mean, like he lives with me for Christ's sake. So, I mean, yeah. But yeah, and this is Spencer, our dog. So if you're allergic, you know, sorry, but
Spencer.
she's terrifying. She's our jackal, resident jackal. So, yes.
Jaima, Jaima, we got to meet the whole family. There's Andrew here.
Nakya.
There's Ma, Nakya Devi. Speak of the Mahasuri. Jai Ma Nakya.
Yeah.
Jai Ma Nakya.
Um,
So Kuleshwari and Andrew Ji had come down, both of them had come down last year for Shyama Kali Puja, and it was a hoot and a holler. Jackals in the smashan howling at the moon, and that was when Anakya Kali was installed through the ritual known as Prana Pratishta, when the deity is awakened. So it's a fully ritually consecrated murti, and that means Ma Kuleshwari's living room is a mandir, and where mother is, there her jackals will gather. So as always, it's just open to the public. There's no cost. Like if you want to donate, you obviously can, but the dakshina system is like it's never expected, you know. Like dakshina is never expected. It's only about getting together and celebrating Ma just for fun. So anybody anywhere can come. And Kuleshwari was kind enough to offer the living room for anybody who wanted to stay there. And there are Airbnbs around. And Ruby, this is crazy, but Ruby was so excited and was so willing to like help that she said if you get to capacity, like if there are more people than can be housed, that she would be happy to take them on also because she has some spare rooms and things like that. So whoever wants to come, like send me a message and we'll see how many we can fit in Kuleshwari's place and with Ruby's place. And of course, there are Airbnbs and stuff like that. But everyone's welcome. Let's just all converge and see what happens.
yeah. So we have a living room space, which is pretty large. We have a bed, like a second bedroom, and then our room. So, also we have a harmonium here, but if anyone wants to bring like other instruments, that would be totally cool.
Yeah. And usually how these things go is there's no particular plan or anything. Mainly we're interested in doing pujas and homas and singing kirtans and bhajans and whatnot. But also we'll do some satsang like throughout the day. So in my mind, like Friday evening, all of Saturday, all of Sunday, maybe we could, besides the pujas and besides the homas and besides visiting some local temples, we could take up a text, something short, maybe like some short text like the Shiva Jnana Bodham or the Shiva Sutra, or maybe like Karpuradi Stotram, maybe. It might be nice to study something more esoteric within the tradition and worship of Kali. So we could do something like that. We could study a text, we can have some satsang, but mainly we're just going to get together and have fun. So I don't know what the schedule is like. I'll talk to Kaleshwari about it tomorrow, but I think like mainly we'll think about Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but I will be coming in for your birthday on the 27th. I intend to, at least, Ma willing. So that's happening. And it's very exciting because this year and last year we've been mainly focusing on trying to get together in person. So last year in the summer we went to Europe and it was wonderful to see some Sangha in Amsterdam and in Zurich, and that was really nice in Germany, Zurich, Amsterdam. And then we went to India in December and January, which is of course like kind of like home base. That's really nice to be there all together. But then this year we went to San Francisco, and then we did New York, and then Delaware, and then Buffalo and Toronto and all of that. And it was so wonderful, but I felt like it was we just kind of did it very quickly. And so it's nice to have like a month ahead of us and just plan and like say, okay, here's your heads up. So that's happening. And that's our main purpose. Like I'm trying to get us in a room together so we can do puja together and all that. But I have to apologize though, because in getting together in person, especially with the LA Sangha, like as our community grows, having in-person pujas and whatnot has meant that I haven't really been able to be as present with the online community as I would have liked. So I just want to remind everybody and also apologize for um, neglecting this. But if you go into the Discord, like the Discord community is really, really awesome. And if you have any questions, if you put them in like questions and answers, even if I'm not able to answer your questions in the Q&As, like there are people, very qualified and very spiritually advanced people in the community that might be able to help. So there's this cool questions and answers thing on the Discord. Like that's a cool way to stay connected. But also the check-in. Like honestly, this is my favorite thing about our Discord. Like the check-in is not a competitive place where people are comparing their sadhanas to one another. It's a place where people are all inspiring one another to get on the mat and to do spiritual practice. Because as you know, our community is a very sadhana-oriented community. We don't want to just talk about stuff. We want to experience them. We don't want to just like sit by the side of the river. We want to jump in and quench our thirst and not just like conceptualize and intellectually masturbate, which can easily become what we do when we study such highly refined philosophies like this. So meditation, puja, japa, satsang, kirtana, like all of that stuff is so important. And it's in this check-in, I think, where we can really, as a community, inspire each other to plunge into sadhana. So I'm gonna try, like today, my resolution is to get back into the check-in and try to like check in as often as I used to back in the day. But here it is. There's a check-in, and things are getting kind of crazy in the Discord because the community is growing at a pretty alarming rate. But that's also nice because it means that you'll never have to feel alone or like, there's a sense in which you're not on the spiritual path by yourself. Although ultimately it is the journey of the alone to the alone, it's still nice to be alone together. It's nice to share the path and to, like, the Ram Dass sense, walk each other home like that. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful community. So there's the Discord, and I'm so, so sorry that I haven't been as active on there as I would have liked. Now, one other thing I've noticed is that there are a lot of people wanting to have like one-on-one meetings, like having conversations. That's, I think, so, so valuable to be able to just like talk to each other in real time and be able to hear about your sadhana and respond to it like in a more personal way. And sometimes we don't get to do that in the Q&A. So I noticed that there weren't that many slots throughout the week for that. I think there were 2 slots on Tuesday, 2 slots on Wednesday, 2 slots on Thursday, and 1 slot on Friday. So there was like 7 slots. But there were way more people who wanted to have these meetings and there were slots available. So an update, I'm very, very excited to announce that like we have extra slots. So I've added a slot on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and also another one on Friday. So we've added 4 more slots. So that's 4 and 7. That's like 11 slots for our 30-minute conversation. However, I'm a fool and I need tech support because the link doesn't work. I just discovered I changed the link. So okay, this is the main update. Those of you who are using that link to book calls, it's not going to work anymore because I changed it to like include more times, but it gave me a new link and it's working for some people, it's not working for other people, and I don't know why. I don't know what's up with Calendly, and I think technologically illiterate. So I'm gonna have someone look at that for me. But as of now, some of you might have the link and it might be working, and some of you, if your link is not working, just maybe give me until the end of the week. I'm gonna try to sort that out. But mainly I want to offer more time for those one-on-ones. And yeah, please jump on that because I would love to like just get to talk to you. And if there aren't any slots in that kind of offering there, like the Q&A is a good time, you know. So if you have something that you want to talk about, if it isn't private and if it isn't personal, and if it pertains to your sadhana and to structuring your sadhana and to spiritual life, like don't be shy. When we finish this lecture, we'll have a Q&A. And tonight I hope to have a somewhat more extended Q&A so we can talk about these things. There are some very refined and subtle philosophies that are worth inquiring into and dwelling upon and contemplating. And we can do that. We can hash these things out. And that's what the Q&A is for, okay? So like when I finish this lecture, we'll go into the Q&A, and if for whatever reason those private 101 like 30-minute sessions aren't available for you, if there's like a barrier to that, we can try to hash it out in the Q&A. Albeit like we're all together, we'll try to turn off the recording to maintain privacy. But it would be good, I think, to have more personal conversations. So let's try to reclaim the Q&A as a time for that, you know? And that's the thing about the Discord. Like if we don't get to have our discussion during the Q&A, and if we don't get to have our one-on-one, like there's still the question and answers thread on the Discord. Tāntrik Ji is there. And there's so many resources for studying Sanskrit on the Discord. So not only are we a very sadhana-oriented community, you might have noticed that we're also a very like Sanskrit-oriented community in order to empower people to access the primary sources for themselves. So if you're going to study Tantra, it's better that you don't study it only from the idiosyncratic interpretation of certain figures on the internet or in the personal, like in your personal life. It's better that you see what the texts are saying for yourself. Now, many of these texts aren't in Sanskrit. Many of them are in Tamil or in other dialects, like in Malayali, in the Grantha script or in the Sarada script. But most of them are in Sanskrit. So if you learn some Sanskrit, you'll have a bit more access to the primary sources, which is very important to us to maintain transparency and to empower, I think, a kind of learning with the most integrity. So all of this stuff, Tāntrik Ji has worked so hard to put together, and he's quite active. So he's our moderator now, and he's just like really on it. He's giving so much structure to the Shakti that's just flowing in this community. So to learn Sanskrit, to ask questions, to share poems, to share art, to share music, to talk about stuff, and most of all, to check in and inspire one another on the path of sadhana. Like this Discord community is really, really wonderful for that. It's kind of crazy in the beginning, like just to wrap your head around how it works. There are all these various like channels and things like that, but you'll get the hang of it. And my prayer is that you'll meet people, and it's not about moksha, it's about the friends you make along the way. But you can meet people, and then we'll be able to meet more and more in various cities around this country and around the world. So like that's the thing that we're working on right now. So that's my update for today. Okay, there's a new link for the one-on-one meetings. Right now, as of now, I think it's broken. I don't know why. I'll try to fix it by tonight or by the end of this week. But there are 4 more sessions. Okay, so it's 7 sessions, 4 sessions. We have 11 sessions to talk one-on-one in a private setting on Zoom over the course of the week. And let's try to reclaim the Q&As, and let's try to like reclaim time where we can. Okay. So anyway, yeah. Colorado retreat, new link for signing up for the one-on-ones, and Jaima. And online community is awesome too. Please forgive me for neglecting it a little bit to do the in-person stuff. A balance is being struck slowly but surely. Okay. So with all of that said, let's plunge into this discussion. And again, I want to make this point that this is a somewhat subtle discussion. So we'll try to do it quite slowly. And it's subtle because it's simple. It's not subtle because it's overly complicated. It's subtle because what we're talking about is so immediate and so apparent that it's almost occult. And by occult, I mean occluded. It's almost imperceptible by virtue of how obvious it is. And that's what we're going to try to uncover a little bit when we start talking about Kālī. So we'll start with this. When we say the word Shiva, we mean that deity which is perhaps formally called Rudra. So in the Vedic pantheon, there are various nature forces, if you will, that are anthropomorphized or personified as deities, which can each be worshipped as the supreme reality interchangeably. So this is where you get the idea that there's one reality and you can call it by different names. Because in one Veda, in one Samhita, you might see that it's Brihaspati who is the ultimate reality. Whereas in another shloka, you might see that it's Ganapati, Ganesh, who is the absolute reality. So the names are quite interchangeable, whether it's like Soma or Brihaspati or Indra or what have you. But in this context, there is a particular deity named Rudra whose name literally means the howler or the screamer or something like that. And this name might refer to the destructive aspects of nature. So, like violent storms and hurricanes and floods and whatnot. And we were talking about how the monsoon season corresponds to the holy month of Shravana, the sacred month that is devoted to Lord Shiva. And I think that's no coincidence because the primordial Shiva, the Vedic Shiva, and arguably you can even make claims about the pre-Vedic Shiva and like Mohenjo-daro Harappan civilization, because we have evidence that the Indus Saraswati Valley might have also worshipped Shiva in much the same way that we currently worship Shiva by pouring water onto a lingam and whatnot. So we can't really say very much about the pre-Vedic Shiva because we don't have literature. We have more or less indecipherable cuneiform tablets, but we have images that strikingly resemble Tāntrik ideas, like Shiva with the Shushumna Nadi seated in a yogic posture and whatnot. But anyway, putting that aside for the moment, the first depiction, at least, we get in the literature is from places like the Yajurveda, where you have 100 names or so to Lord Shiva. The Sri Rudram is, of course, a very, very important piece of literature when it comes to Tantra, when it comes to Shaiva Tantra specifically. And the thing about the Sri Rudram is it's right in the middle of the Yajurveda. Yajurveda is the Veda of sacrifices. It's the most ritualistic, arguably, of all the Vedas. Now, the Atharva Veda is the most magical, arguably, of all the Vedas. It's the most humanistic, the most black magic-y, if you will. And so many people attribute the Atharva Veda as the source of the tradition known as Tantra or Agama. So where do the Tantras come from? Where do the Agamas come from? Well, they're the Vedas represented to suit the needs of the Kali Yuga. But which Veda is predominantly featured in the Tantric transmission? And many people will say it's the Atharva Veda. But of course, I'm of the opinion that the Yajur Veda is a bit more central in terms of like contributing mantras and contributing philosophical infrastructure and also in contributing literature like stotrams and various other things to help us contextualize what we mean when we say the word Shiva. So in the Yajurveda, in the very middle of the Yajurveda is the Sri Rudram. And many of you have heard this chanted. Om Namo Bhagavate Rudraya. Om Gananāntva Ganapatingum Havamahe Kavim Kavinam Upamashravastamang Jeshta Rajam Brahmana Brahmanaspata Ana Shrinvanutibhi Seda Sadhanam. Om. That mantra is from this Sri Rudram. And in the middle of the Sri Rudram, this is very interesting. I mean, just think about the symmetry here. In the middle of the Yajurveda is this hymn called the Sri Rudram, devoted to Rudra, the storm god of the Vedas, who is here conceived of as the absolute reality. But in the middle of the Sri Rudram, there appears the central mantra of the Shaiva transmission, Namah Shivaya. That's in the very middle of the Sri Rudram. And of course, many of you are familiar with the Maha Mrityunjaya mantra. Om Trayambakam Yajamahe. See, that mantra is also from the Yajurveda. It's from the Rudram, as well as various other mantras you might have encountered in your study of Shaiva Tantra. So last week, we talked about this mantra, Namah Shivaya. It is known as the Panchakshari. And we encountered a verse in a dualistic Shaiva Agama known as the Raurava Agama. And that verse said something so beautiful. Verse 9 of the Shiva Upanishad or Shiva Jnana Bodha. It says, Chid Drishatmani Drishtvesham Tyaktva Vritti Marichakam Labdva Shiva Pada Chayam Dhyayet Panchakshari Sudhi. The wise one should meditate on the 5-syllabled mantra, the Panchakshari. Pancha Akshari. Aksha means Ksha. So is the first syllable of the Mātrikās system of phonemes, and Ksha is the last syllable, but Akshara has the connotation of that imperishable vibration that inheres in consciousness. So the 5 Aksharas, Panchakshari, the 5 syllables, namely Na, Ma, Shi, Va, and Ya. And these, of course, represent the 5 faces of Lord Shiva, the 5 powers of Lord Shiva, the 5 actions of Lord Shiva, the 5 elements, the Panchabhutas, the 5 offerings, the 5 Taittiriya, Aranyaka mantras. We talked all about what these 5 symbolize. And then we looked at Om, known as the Veda Pranava, or the Pranava Shabda. Pranava Shabda means primordial sound. And generally we mean Om when we say that word. So when we look at Om, we see that it's also a kind of Panchakshari. If we take the Prakara, and the Ukara and the Makara, as well as the Bindu and the Nada. So if we take the like symbol of Om, you can see it's at least 5 things. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's bindu, there's nada. So nada is the dot, bindu is the dot, nada is the resonance in which that dot is configured. But you can also think of them as the 5 states. And turiya, remember turiya is a state. So we have jagrata, waking, we have swapna, dreaming, we have shushupti, deep sleep, and then we have that which is beyond deep sleep, which I think you can call samadhi in this tradition, and that which is beyond even samadhi, which is like an eyes open samadhi called turiya tita. So there's turiya and there's turiya tita. So altogether, jagrat, swapna, shushupti, turiya tita, they all make 5 states. And so those 5 states are being indicated by Om, like we learn in the Mandukya Upanishad and whatnot. So we have Om as a Panchakshari, we have Namah Shivaya as a Panchakshari. But this verse in the Raudava Agama tells us that in terms of practice, we should just meditate upon and become one with and contemplate this mantra. If we are wise, then we would do well to take up Namah Shivaya and to meditate on it, to practice with it. But it also tells us that the way to do this is by first having seen the Lord in one's own self through the eye of consciousness. Now, that's a very profound statement. And here you can see a whole world of Advaitic interpretation is available to us. But I'll hold off on that for now. The next statement is, of course, a yogic statement. It refers to like a Patanjalian approach to yoga. Tyaktva means to abandon. Vritti, modifications. Marichi, like rays. So to abandon the various modifications of the mirage-like mind. In other words, you should focus, you should concentrate, you should stay present with the mantra as you chant, as you visualize. It's a very yogic thing to say. But then importantly, this verse also tells us about Diksha, one of the most important rituals in the Tantric tradition. So when we come to Tantra, we seek a guru, at whose feet we take refuge and from whom we receive a mantra, from whom we receive not only a practice and help in understanding the various texts of the tradition, but from whom we get solace and real human companionship and guidance, and in whose shade we take shelter. So this beautiful phrase, Shiva, Pada, Chāyaṁ, the shadow or the shade, the cooling, soothing shelter of the feet, or rather Pada means footstep, or it means state, the feet of the Guru, or the footstep of the Guru, or the grace of Lord Shiva. So having received the cooling and soothing grace of Lord Shiva, labdva means having gained or having attained this grace, having given up all other distractions in the mirage-like mind, and having seen the Lord as one's own self through the eye of consciousness, one should contemplate the Panchakshari, or one should meditate upon the 5-syllabled mantra. This is what we learned last week. So here's what happens. There are a group of practitioners in the Vedic context who are chanting things like the Shri Rudram. And through doing these kinds of things, like chanting the Shri Rudram, like performing the yagyas of the Yajurveda, they contact that energy called Rudra. And by the way, in today's discussion, I'm going to slip between a philosophical way of speaking about things and then also from that into a more mystical, magical kind of folk way of talking about things. And also I'm going to talk about it in a kind of historical and cultural way. So the mystical or magical, the cultural and the historic, and the philosophical, theological, and metaphysical. Hopefully you can see that they'll all interpenetrate one another in the narrative in tonight's talk. So let's come back to our narrative. These practitioners chanting the Shri Rudram, practicing the Vedic injunctions of the Yajurveda and various others, come to equate themselves with this energy called Rudra, with this storm god, this howling, crying, ferocious power. Ananda Purima, good to see you today. Jayama. In Bharata, so nice. And so now this energy, this is a very important question to ask. What is the nature of this energy? Probably something transformative, probably something destructive. Because whatever the case may be, it's quite noteworthy that these early worshippers of Rudra, these practitioners in the cult of Rudra, started gravitating towards the smashan, the cremation ground. And you can see that in the Puranas, Lord Shiva is very much associated with mortuary symbols. He's the god of death, in a sense, destruction and transformation. So when we think of the Trimurti, the idea of divinity as having 3 aspects, creating, maintaining, and destroying, and we superimpose these onto the 3 main deities of the Puranic age, we can see that Brahma often plays the role of creator deity, and he's, of course, scorned. He's the least respected of the three. Vishnu plays the role of the preserving force, the maintaining force, a force of law and order. And Shiva plays the role of destruction, which is a very important role, but a somewhat undesirable role. So Shiva and Brahma are diametrically opposed to one another. See, Brahma or Prajapati or Daksha wants eternal life. He wants to build and create, whereas Shiva wants to destroy it. He's naturally kind of antinomian. Shiva is an iconoclastic transgressor of values and institutions and norms in the name of transformation, creativity, and change. So the two are diametrically opposed. Brahma, the force of creation and genesis, and Shiva, the force of dissolution, reabsorption, destruction, and transformation. So in the Puranas, you see that there are all these stories depicting this tension between Shiva and between Daksha Prajapati. But when we think of the Trimurti, with Brahma as the creator, with Vishnu as the preserver, and with Shiva as the destroyer, naturally you can see how Rudra is the precedent for Shiva. Because even in the Vedic time, prior to the cult of Shiva rising in prominence amongst practitioners in the subcontinent, you saw that the same idea of like mortuary symbology, destruction and transformation is attributed to Rudra also. That's why the word Rudra is somewhat interchangeable with the word Shiva. In any case, Rudra might be a fierce form of Shiva, a primordial Bhairava, if you will. So these people who are worshipping Rudra, and they contacted Rudra arguably through their Vedic practice of the Yajurveda and the Sri Rudram and whatnot, these people started moving into the cremation ground. So these early Shaivas, we say, were very attracted to the smashan. And we've given many reasons for why this might have been the case. Like in one sense, it's a quiet place to go and practice. No one goes there and stays there for long. So people go, they have their funerals, they burn their family on the funeral pyre, and then they leave. And you can stay there and practice your meditation relatively unbothered, undisturbed. So if you wanted some silence, if you wanted some space, and if you wanted some privacy, that might be reason enough to go to the smashan, to go to the cremation ground. So it's a good place for that. But also, it's a powerful place for ascetic traditions because it reminds you of the illusory and transient nature of life. So often, Prajapati, Daksha, Brahma, he wants progeny, he wants to build, he loves institutions. But when you are of a hesychastic temperament, that is to say, if you have a kind of ascetic tendency, you might look at those same structures and institutions and recognize the decay and degeneration that is already inherent in their creation. So you might start to scorn or shun institutions because they're limiting, because they're also fraught, they're transient, they're temporally bound. And if you are seeking the eternal, that infinite, which doesn't decay, which doesn't degenerate, in short, if you are seeking God, then you will start to move away from the world. That's why the Christ, he again and again stressed this idea that you cannot worship God and mammon both. Or like you can't serve two masters, or wisdom with the world is foolishness with God, or foolishness with God is wisdom with the world, like that. So when we cling to finite temporal structures, when we engage with those things that are really vanity of all vanities, then we're not interested in taking time out of our lives to sit and meditate and contact something deeper, something absolute, something transcendent. But if you are the kind of person who is interested in the eternal, infinite, and transcendent, and that's everyone here, all 50 or so of you are interested in the absolute, then you might actually crave the cremation ground. Because in the cremation ground, you are confronted with this fact of the illusory and transitory and ephemeral nature of reality. It helps you with renunciation. And so you can see that Tyaktva vritti marichakam, that idea that you should abandon all the distractions of the mirage-like mind, that's more likely to happen if you practice in a cremation ground. Because in the cremation ground, not only are you removed from the hustle and bustle of society, so your mind won't be agitated by the humdrum, mundane existence that you once had as a Brahmin priest or something, but not only that, it's also the case that you are every day confronting the fact that your body is not eternal. You're watching bodies burn. And so you watch a beautiful woman one day burn, a beautiful man burn, a beautiful person burn, and you think, is beauty really in the body? Why is it that I'm so aggravated, so attracted to flesh? Is that really worth thinking about? And then you renounce that. And then you think about money and you think, is it really worth spending all my time and energy collecting money? Here's a rich man. He's getting burnt at the pyre. Here's a beggar. He too is getting burnt at the pyre. At the end of the day, both of them end up the same. They're just both pile of ash. Neither of them can boast of their bank balances at this point. You know, like the scarcity of the beggar and the abundance of the rich person, both are rendered null and void by the final destination that they both share. So this kind of thing, like when you look at bodies burning every day, and of course the smashans, they were all by the river because you would just kind of push the body off into the river. So you would sit by the river and you'd be surrounded by all these funeral pyres and the smell of burning flesh. And it's actually kind of appetizing, I have to say, because there's a lot of sandalwood for the very rich people. They burn very good wood, and there's a lot of camphor and a lot of sandalwood paste, and there are garlands, so many garlands of flowers, and they bob up and down in the river. But also, sometimes the bodies don't burn all the way down before they push them into the ghat. So from the ghat, they get pushed into the river, and then you just see bodies bobbing up and down, and there are crows flying about, and various animals like jackals and wild boars and whatnot, snuffling here and snuffling there, trying to find something to eat. And there you are, seated in the midst of all of this, amidst the smell of burning flesh and wood, surrounded by very poignant reminders of your own mortality. It's kind of like Dead Poet Society. Memento mori. See all these boys? They're all feeding daisies. That kind of idea. Like when you realize that you're going to die, that really lights a fire under your ass. Because you know sooner or later someone is actually going to light a fire under your ass, and this body will be cremated. So that itself can light that fire right now itself to pursue sadhana, to pursue the eternal, because time's a wasting, you know, that feeling. So that feeling of urgency in sadhana, that feeling of nonchalance and renunciation, that can be cultivated in the smashan. So, tyaktva, having abandoned, vritti marichakam, the various mental modifications or the various distractions of the mirage-like mind, which is very, very possible for someone who spends time in the cremation ground, it's likely that you can also attain the grace of Lord Shiva. So this is the next point. This is maybe a more esoteric reason for going to the cremation ground. Yeah, one, it's a quiet and private place in which you will be unbothered while you do your sadhana, so you can really focus. Two, it reminds you of your own ephemeral transitory nature, which helps you focus in your meditation. But three, you go there because the deity that you love is likely to be encountered there. Remember, Shiva in the Puranic world is very, very much a mortuary deity. He's like often hanging out in the cremation ground, meditating by a funeral pyre. His dhuni is the funeral pyre. He's covered in ash, dead man's ash, and he's wearing bone malas, you know, a necklace of skulls or a necklace of heads. His ornaments are kind of ghastly. He's got like serpent bracelets and serpent armlets and a serpent necklace, and he's got matted, dirty hair, and like, you know, his friends are ghosts and ghouls and whatnot. So clearly, this is like a very Scorpio degeneration, death kind of symbol. And Rudra has that same connotation also. Maybe not so iconographically developed as in the Puranic age, but even then, even in the Vedic age, you can see that it has to do with death and destruction. And so arguably, Rudra and Shiva call you to the smashan because their energy is associated to that. So you just go there. You just naturally want to go there because you feel and you've been told by your scripture that that is where you will find them. You know, it's not just about silence and privacy. It's not just about renunciation and cultivating a sense of dispassion so you can focus on your spiritual practices. It's also because of bhakti, because of devotion, because you love this deity and you're firmly convinced because of what the texts say and because of your own intuition that this energy is most likely to be encountered in the smashan. Because of that, you go. You know, and you have to understand something. The smashan is a place of absolute impurity. Blood is very impure, and there's blood in the smashan. Bones and decaying flesh is very impure, and the fires of the smashan are considered impure and polluting. So you have to also keep in mind that the brahmanas, the priests of this time, and arguably like of all time, have been very puritanical. They've historically been very careful about things like purity and impurity, and for good reason too. For a long time in our spiritual life, that's going to be kind of valuable to have a sense of the sacred, to have some sense of sanctity or purity in order to be able to live your life in a way that like cultivates sattva. In other words, cultivates that luminous clarity that we call spirituality, or that helps us in our spiritual pursuits. So if you eat certain foods, the thing is, you're going to feel heavy and you're going to feel lethargic. Certain foods can be very tamasic. And not just that, certain foods like onions and garlic can be very rajasic. So food can make you incredibly angry or depressed or anxious because of the gut brain. You know, like they knew that. They knew that the food also affects the mind in a very, pardon the pun, visceral way. So they were careful about what happened in the viscera. They were careful about what they put in there. They were careful about mushrooms and leeks. They were careful about meat. And certainly they were careful about wine because they felt that if they even so much as smelled wine, and again, I'm not talking about the early Vedics who probably had soma and were doing all sorts of like psychoactive substances in a kind of orgiastic, pastoral setting. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about urban, civilized Brahminical society in which like wine was considered incredibly taboo. If you smell it, some kind of drakshi or something, grape wine or some kind of grain spirit, like mead, like a honey wine, madhya or pishti or something. If you so much as smelled it, you would have to take a bath. And if you so much as sipped it, you would have to be reinitiated in some communities. So there are texts like, what do you call it? Like Manusmriti and various others that are very clear about what to eat and what not to eat, where to stay and where not to stay, who to be with and who not to be with, when to sleep and when to wake up, what to wear and how you should wear it, and various rituals called sanskaras that you are to perform at certain times in your life, like rites of passage. And all of these things are done to maintain ritual purity in order for these shamanic elites to perform their functions as the shamans of the community. And that's true not just of Vaidika civilization, it's true of civilizations all around the world. The shamans often live apart from the rest of society. They're often very careful about what they eat, with whom they spend time. They're careful about their lifestyle choices, when they sleep, when they wake up. They're careful about what they wear and how they wear it. And they too, in every culture, have like various rites of passages that they undergo in order to refine their ability to perform their priestly role. And that makes sense, actually, and that's valuable, and that shouldn't be thrown out the window in the name of like Shaiva, transgressive, Tāntrik lifestyles. Like these things can be very grounding and very helpful. And the fact of the matter is, each of us is affected by food in a different way. We're affected by the people and the company that we keep. We're affected by our surroundings. So we should be discerning about these things. Not that we need to follow someone else's rules about what to eat and what not to eat, where to stay and where not to stay, but we should have our own rules, I think. Right? We should have our own boundaries and our own sense of what is sacred and sanctified and stick to that. Some of us are night owls. We like to stay up all night because we get better sadhana at night. Some of us, we find that we're distracted at night and we get better sadhana in the day. So we wake up early and then we do spiritual practices early in the morning. And that's going to be different from person to person. So we have different bedtimes, we have different waking up times. Unfortunately for you, I'm a night owl. Kali sadhana is usually done at night. So that's why these satsangs are pretty late also. It's only when the sun goes down that I feel like I want to talk about Kali or Bhairava. Before that, I like the bhava is just perfect in this, especially the new moon or a waning moon like that. But if you're worshipping a particular kind of deity, you might have a more nighttime sadhana. If you're worshipping another kind of deity, you might have more morning time sadhana. I don't know. We each all have a different schedule and we all have different diets. Like I was just telling you, for my family, a meat eating diet was better for them. Like a Kshatriya family eats meat, and that was nourishing for them and part of their culture and what they enjoyed. It's what they loved. Whereas some people, when they start doing spiritual practices, they find that they're not able to eat heavier meats anymore. I don't know. Sometimes for some people, meat can be spiritualizing. It can help you. It gives you energy and ability to do spiritual practice. For other people, it makes you really heavy. But for me, I've noticed that this whole vegetarianism thing is so dangerous because it comes with pride. It's wonderful and compassionate and all, but from a spiritual point of view, one can start to get the sense that we're better than others because our stomach is so pure and we eat such pure food. But we have to remember there's no objective standard for purity. The first point I'm trying to make here is that like maybe rules are important, but maybe each of us is empowered to come up with our own rules. But we can't deny that there are certain foods that help us and certain foods that harm us. We can't deny that we need to have certain bedtimes and certain schedules and certain lifestyles. And we can't deny that there's an effect, a real effect in the kind of company that we keep. So this is what you can think about in the context of Brahminical purity. So in this context, the cremation ground is incredibly defiled. It's like so impure. And if you go in there, you become sullied, not just in the level of the body, but in like some kind of psychical, spiritual way, you become stained. So this is a scary place for you. Like when you look at the cremation ground as a Brahmana, as a priest in the context of the Yajurveda, or in the context of Vaidika civilization, you would think, ew, gross. Why would I want to go in there? See, your desire for the transcendent must be really strong in order to go to the cremation ground. You must really want to realize the absolute beyond the temporal, transitory world in order to brave the impurity of the cremation ground. And not only that, you would have to brave the censure of your society. They would all cast you out for going there and living there and eating impure foods and wearing impure clothes. So you would be an outcast. You'd be kicked out of society. You could never come home again, really. You wouldn't be able to like participate in those social conventions or social structures in which at one time you might have found comfort or solace. So going to the cremation ground meant you would lose your Brahmana card, your ability to access elite society. It meant that you would have to encounter impurity and risk being defiled in a psychical and spiritual way. And so you might wonder, why would anybody want to do this? The costs are just too high for a member of Vaidika Brahmanical society. It's probably because of this. They recognized that one of the biggest obstacles to their spiritual progress was the pride that came with their caste. They felt themselves to be better than others, maybe. And so they went to the cremation ground to undo that kind of conditioning. They went there to kill a Brahman. They went there to kill Brahmanas. And who was the Brahmana that was killed? The one that you were. You went there to overcome the ego. Of course, all this can be related to a Puranic story where Lord Shiva kills Brahma. See, I told you there's tension between the two of them. And in one episode, Brahma is lustfully chasing his own daughter because that's what it's like to be involved in the world. We're like so incestuous, actually. All brothers and sisters, and yet we're trying to use everyone as means to an end. So here's Brahma caught up in his own mirage. He created the world, and now he exists in this world as this like lustful, greedy, like never satisfied, aggravated person. And he's chasing his own daughter around. And Lord Shiva, the protector of women, the protector of young women, and the protector of marginalized people, he shows up as Bhairava and he chops off Brahma's head, Brahma's fifth head. And so you have to remember that that was a sin on the part of Lord Shiva because Brahma is the primordial Brahmana. He's Adi Brahmana. He's like the first Brahmin. And the worst thing you can do, arguably, in Indian society is kill a Brahmin. It's called Brahma Hatya. So Lord Shiva is guilty of having killed a Brahmin. He performed this sacrifice called Brahma Hatya. So to atone for his act, this is so interesting, to purify himself of his killing a Brahmin, he decides to take up an austerity, to take up a penance. And he goes to the cremation ground and he vows to live there, covered in ash, eating out of a skull bowl in order to atone for his sin. So Bhairava arguably is the form of Shiva who emerges upon the destruction of the ego, the killing of the Brahmin within, the holy man or the holy woman that you think that you are. And again, it's wonderful to be holy. Like, there are much worse things to be than a person with a clear sense of what is pure and what is impure. There are much worse things to be than a person who has a sense of the sacred and the sanctified and who sticks to rules and is regulated in their eating and in their sleeping and in their company. Like, that's not a bad thing to be, but it can stunt your growth if you become attached to that idea of yourself as a holy person, as a pure person. So these brahmanas, they knew that that was a spiritual obstacle among many others. So pride of caste, but also shame. Shame and fear and hatred, all of these things were hang-ups. They were spiritual obstacles. And the moment they perceived these things as being forces that interrupted their spirituality, they resorted to maybe like shock tactics, like going to the cremation ground and voluntarily courting fear and shame as a kind of exposure therapy, maybe to overcome their aversions. They voluntarily went to the cremation ground and started imitating Bhairava, who is atoning for the killing of a Brahmin, having killed the Brahmin within. So what a wonderful story of like spiritual pioneers who out of love for their deity, Rudra or Shiva, moved into the cremation ground, a place of utter defilement, in order to contact the absolute beyond all their conventional notions of right and wrong, beyond all their ideas of pure or impure. So every one of us, I think, in pursuing God, will have to at some point or other step out of structures that are conventional, familiar to us, in which we find comfort, stability, and solace. That could be a church, that could be a family, that could be a society. And it doesn't mean you actually have to leave any of these things, but you have to leave them in your mind at least, in order to be able to articulate your own path, which is unique to you. There has never been someone like you, and there never will be someone like you. So your path to God is unique. And these brahmanas, these early practitioners in our tradition, they knew that. And so they went to the cremation ground. But it wasn't just brahmanas doing this. I think it's a great victory for someone who's addicted to purity to decide to do this. But it was many other types of people that were there too, because arguably there were already people living there, chandalas and whatnot. There were already tribes that would like live in the cremation ground, or there were people whose job it was to manage the bodies of the cremation ground. And not only that, all other members of all other parts of society had equal access to the cremation ground. So many people were gathering there. So again, coming back to my point about Srinagar and Madurai Meenakshi and Kolkata and um, Kerala, and of course, Los Angeles and various other cities. Isn't it wonderful when many different streams come together? Because you have to remember, outside of the smashan, life is very ordered and structured, and you stay within your family structure, and you don't marry outside of your, clan. I mean, you can't marry within your gotra, but you can't marry like a non-Brahmana if you're a Brahmin. You can't marry a non-Kshatriya if you're a Kshatriya, like that. Like the purity of the castes is so important. And like you don't really interact with other people in society. You don't get a chance to be exposed to other ideas. So when you enter the smashan, you enter a liminal space, not just between life and death, which is of course the most dramatic thing about the smashan, but it's a liminal space shared by many different cultures. So you're in between so many different people. It's like going to public school or something. It's great. I loved it. Now, of course, I wasn't in class a lot, but this is the important point that if you're in this smashan, you're encountering new ideas, you're encountering new people. And some of those people might have lived there their whole lives. For generations, they might have lived in the smashan, and they might have acquainted themselves with the energies of the smashan. So this is like a melting pot. The cremation ground is like this wonderful confluence of ideas and traditions and streams. Anyway, you have to remember that the reason they started going to the cremation ground was so that they could meditate on their favorite form of divinity called Rudra, which they identified with the absolute transcendent eternal reality. But it was a dualistic approach. So in the early tradition, it's just the desire to be one with that deity, to go beyond all forms of suffering. So these early practitioners are called Pashupatas, and Pashupatins, like this form of Shaivism, is perhaps one of the most primordial forms of Shaivism. It's like maybe the first iteration of singular devotion to Lord Shiva in the form of Pashupati. So Pashupata, so Pashupata means Pashupati, like the god Pashupati. So the Pashupatas, the ones who worshipped Pashupati, they were probably dualist in the beginning. But what did they do in the cremation ground? This is a wonderful story. They went there and they practiced meditation, like we said in the class last week. But what did they meditate on? Mantras. Probably Om Namah Shivaya. Maybe the whole Sri Rudram. They might have continued chanting that in the privacy and power of the smashan, but also they were very interested in a set of 5 mantras that also come from the Yajurveda, from the Taittiriya Aranyaka. These are the 5 Shiva mantras known as like Tatpurusha mantra, Vamadeva mantra, Ghora mantra, Sadyojata mantra, like that. So, Tatpurushaya Vidmahe, Mahadevaya Dhimahi, that Gayatri. And also there's another one that we chant a lot together. Agorebhyo, Tagorebhyo, Ghora Ghora, Taribhya. So these are all various mantras. So they might have chanted all 5, or they might have picked one of the 5 to meditate on. They might have focused on one particular aspect of Shiva. So Shiva or Rudra, this energy is now conceived of as being permeated by mantra. So his body is composed of these 5 mantras. So we say he has 5 heads. Panchavaktram Trinetram. He has 3 eyes and 5 heads and whatnot. All these descriptions are provided in our text. But these 5 heads in the early part of the tradition represent these 5 mantras on which the early Pashupatins were all meditating. So Pashupata Shaivism is a dualistic approach to Lord Shiva. And its goal was dukkha nivritti, the permanent cessation of all suffering, which they thought they could achieve through chanting one or more of these primordial mantras from the Vedas. Okay, but again, remember, all of this is in the context of duality. There is Rudra, and that Rudra, one of the various names in the Vedas, is the absolute. As we learn in the Sri Rudram. And it would be good if I go to the cremation ground and spend my life, or at least the later part of my life, meditating on his mantras so that I can attain that state of blessedness where I am free of all my suffering. So in the cremation ground, there would come a very important figure. He wields a club, and it might have been one of the early Bhairavas of the tradition, named Lakulisha. And he told us that instead of like going to the cremation ground at the end of your life, you can go there anytime you want and just stay there. So he started a reform movement within the Pashupata school, and this kind of Pashupata system is known as Lakulisha Pashupata, the Pashupatas of Lakulisha, the Lakulisha reform. So in this tradition, they are less dualistic. They feel themselves to be parts of a whole. So it's a kind of qualified non-duality. Now, we don't really have a real sense of what the Pashupatas are doing because we don't have Pashupata texts, but we do have Lakulisha type texts. So like Kaundinya has done a commentary on the Pashupata Sutra. So there are like texts that tell us what these groups believed in or what they thought the world was. And they were interested in these 5 categories. Again, 5 mantras, 5 heads of Lord Shiva, and also these 5 tattvas. So they argue that the world was real, It's a karya, a cause, an effect. And if there's a real effect, there must therefore be a real cause. So there must be a karta. If there's an effect, there is a cause. And because this world is so complex, the cause must be an intelligent agent. So karta means master, but it really refers to Pashupati in his role as God, the creator, maintainer, and destroyer. So God, world. But then also there's suffering in the world, is there not? There's dukkha. And because there's dukkha, because there's God, there must also be vidhi or yoga. There must be some means by which an individual can affect their liberation. How can there be God and a world in which there is suffering without also being some kind of way out? So the idea is that this God must be benevolent, and this God in his grace must provide means, and that means can be called yoga or vidhi. So the purpose of practicing yoga, or the purpose of following the traditions of the Pashupata Shaiva traditions, was to get free of dukkha. It's called dukkha nivritti, in order to become arguably one with Lord Shiva, at which point you attain through saṅkhyāṁ, through transmission, or through utpatti, the powers of Lord Shiva. So it's not just that you become free of suffering. That's all the Pashupatas were interested in. Pashupatas only want to end suffering. But Lakulisha's reform was interesting because it wasn't just about ending suffering. It was also about attaining power. And that's really interesting, but in the sense of becoming one with Lord Shiva, with Rudra. So you become like Rudra. You attain some of Rudra's power, and thereby you become perennially happy. So the goal is to practice vidhi and therefore affect your moksha or liberation. So these are the 5 categories: master, world, or rather cause, effect, suffering, some yoga, and some state of oneness with Lord Shiva, moksha or siddhi or something like that. So 5 categories. You can see it's a very Buddhistic way of thinking also, because there are many Jainas and Jainas and Buddhists also in the cremation ground at this time. So again, like a wonderful exchange of ideas, a lot of DNA is being exchanged. Okay, so there are a lot of Nyaya masters, a lot of Vaisheshika masters, a lot of Buddhists and Jaina masters, all gathered here. And so these traditions are developing together in the smashan. Okay. Now let's make a philosophical point and then go in for a slightly more magical point. So thus far, we've just been making historical points about all of this. And they're interesting historical points. It's a pretty fascinating narrative. But now let's get into something theological. So theologically speaking, if indeed there is God, how could there be more than one? Because God, by definition, is infinite. And if something is infinite, it has to be non-dual. Spinoza showed us this actually in his Ethics. Spinoza argued for the mathematical proof for God's non-duality. Because here's the thing, if something is infinite and some other entity exists outside of that infinitude, then that infinite entity is limited by the existence of that second entity. So limitation, we defined last week, is where one thing ends and another thing begins. If something is infinite, it means there is no place where it ends. And if there is a place where it ends, only then can you say there is something other than it. So the argument here is that if something is infinite and God is axiomatically, definitionally infinite, then there must only be one. So very quickly you get a kind of monotheism, which arguably is implied in the Samhitas of the Vedas. Although there are many deities presented in the Vedas, there's always, in a sense, some allusion to something beyond those deities, which any one of these deities can come to represent at any time. So they chose Rudra, and they most importantly saw Rudra as the monotheistic ideal, the infinite God who arguably has no second. There's no other God but Rudra. But there's something unique about Rudra. Rudra destroys. And so we learned in the Rauravagama, the first verse in that text is this idea that like Rudra uniquely must be God, because he's the one who destroys. And the one who destroys must be the one who created in the first place. Because really, destruction is about reabsorption. So now I want to introduce a very subtle idea of potentials and actuals. The actual is the emergence of a potential. The potential is what turns into the actual, in the sense of like the Mayuranda Nyaya. So take, for instance, the peacock's egg. This is an example that the Kālī Krama teachers like very much. In Shittikanta, he's obsessed with this peacock egg. You find this reference to the peacock egg again and again and again. And here's the point. The peacock egg has no color in it. Like when you look inside the peacock egg, you don't see blue and purple and green and various other iridescent, beautiful colors. You just see the yolk. And the yolk is just yellow, orange like that. And there's just like all the the egg whites, and you don't see in the egg whites any trace of blue or green or iridescent cyan or anything like that. It's not present in the egg. And yet you know that if you were to leave that egg to hatch, all those colors would appear in the peacock. Now, it's not that those colors are emerging out of nothing. They're the actualization of a latency, of a potential that was always inherent in the egg. The egg always had the colors. It's just a matter of whether or not those colors are expressed or reabsorbed. In other words, expressed or concealed. And the thing is, when that peacock gives birth, I mean, not birth, but when it lays eggs, then that power, that potency goes back to its latent form. It's a very early understanding of DNA and genetics and things like that, that there's a code, and that code contains within it all the information necessary for the expression of something. And then even that expression can evolve back to its source code. It can go back to its potential form. So the whole universe is nothing but potentials activating. It's nothing but manifestations and actualizations of states of latency. So this is a Saṅkhyāṁ idea that the universe is evolution and involution. There's this primordial matter called prakriti, which contains within it, like a peacock's egg, all the potentialities. And then those potentialities, for inscrutable reasons, spring into expression. And then at some point they return to potency. So there's the Mayuranda, the peacock's egg, but there's also the banyan tree. So that's another great example that like in the seed is contained the whole tree, and the tree goes back into the seed. Chicken Little, the acorn fell on his head and he thought the sky was falling. Like that. The acorn is significant. It contains the entire tree. And the tree is significant because it can go back to the acorn. So like that process of evolution and involution, evolution and involution. So the Saṅkhyān system was all about that, like the 24 tattvas evolving out of one prakriti and evolving back into the prakriti, coming out, going in, coming out, going in, that idea. So therefore, if something destroys, in other words, if something turns reality back into its actual form, it must be that thing in which those, into its potential form, it must be the thing in which those potentialities resided in the first place. So this is the first argument. Tasmat, asmat prabhuharaha. Therefore, Lord Shiva, Rudra must be God, for he is the destroyer. It's a very interesting point. Okay, so now we have this idea of a God who reabsorbs, a God who projects, a God who holds, and a God who reabsorbs. The word Bhairava can sometimes be understood in this sense. Bharanath, the one who holds, Bharita, who is full with the world. The one who Ravanath destroys, Ravanath destroys, and Vamanath, who also projects. So the one who holds, destroys, and projects. And so this idea of destruction, reabsorption, and reprojection or re-emission, this idea is a very early idea in the tradition, actually. So then we have this idea of God, who is Rudra, who is uniquely Shiva, and all these people are now meditating on him. So in the first part of the tradition, we're only really interested in Rudra. We're only really interested in Shiva and in affecting our release from this samsaric wheel of birth and death through devotion to Lord Rudra. And of course, there are many different ideas about what that liberation will look like. Like, is it I become one with him? Or do I become like him? Do I lose myself in him? Like, what does it look like for me to be free? Do I inherit power from him? Does that power just arise? This is called utpatti. Or is it transferred the way heat is transferred from one metal rod to another? Is it more like saṅkhyāṁ? Or is it more like pratyabhigya, a recognition of something that was always the case but was hitherto unnoticed to me, by me? So like that, there are many different theories and they're all being developed within the context of Śaivism. But then something happens. And now let me slip into a magical narrative, if you don't mind. So we've been talking philosophically for a little while. Now let me come to something more magical. While all these people were worshipping in the cremation ground, they started contacting certain energies. And these energies changed the way they saw themselves and the world. It changed the way they saw God, and it certainly changed the way they practiced spirituality. Where before they might have been very attached to notions of purity and maybe even notions of asceticism and solitude, now all of that seemed to be up for review, because suddenly you get texts like the Nishvasa Samhita that tell us that we can eat and drink whatever we like, that there are no more rules as to what we eat and what we drink, or with whom we associate. As long as we have lost ourselves in Rudra, the one who has become one with Rudra, has not to follow any rules or injunctions regarding what to eat and what not to eat, what to drink and what not to drink. That's a remarkable idea. So that's already there in Lakulisha. So the early Pashupatas were already experimenting with this idea of not following any rules, like bhakti, devotion, and sadhana being way more important than any kind of external observance. But then something crazy happens. Then they start purposefully interacting with transgressive substances. So maybe the cremation ground was kind of like a gateway drug. Like once you're there anyway, it's like, what else can I reintegrate into my view of reality? And so they started using liquor to worship certain energies in the cremation ground that were fond of liquor. Where did they learn this? Maybe they learned it from the chandalas or the tribes who were living in the cremation ground, who were worshipping spirits with liquor. They also started worshipping spirits with sexual fluids, so male semen, female semen that would be collected during sexual intercourse, or mostly menses. Like that was a highly sacred sacrament because the menses in the Brahmanical context is considered a very impure substance. Like blood is already impure. What to say of menses? You know, these are substances that are scorned by traditional Brahmanic structures. But now you find these people in the cremation ground voluntarily and like intentionally transgressing these very rules that they must have grown up revering. So now they're starting to offer liquor. Remember, if you even smelled wine, you would be forced to take a bath, or if you even sipped it, you would have to get reinitiated or something like that, according to the Manusmritis and various other texts like this. So now they're taking the wine and they're pouring it into like the fire and offering it to certain deities. They themselves are drinking the wine and singing devotional songs in drunken like ecstasy. And not only that, now these ascetics, many of them were like celibate, like men who lived by themselves, if not by themselves, in small communities of other ascetics. Now they started to have consorts. So the idea of like a duti becomes interesting. So duti means, or duti can be also Shakti or Bhairavi or something like. Now these male ascetics were often paired. They often had a partner with whom they would do these rituals. So now you start to get the first partner sort of practices. And then you find that maybe this is, the influence of santals or chandalas or something like that. But you find that like there's now a little bit more fluidity around sexuality. The marriage system is no longer that important to these people. After all, they've stepped out of all the institutions that they once belonged to, and therefore like structures of monogamy might be kind of fluid. And so they arguably in this early period also have been some kind of like orgiastic worship. There might have been like use of transgressive substances like sexual fluids, like menstrual blood, like liquor, various things like that. Okay, so wow, what's going on? What's happening? And why are there suddenly many more women present? I think this is a remarkable cultural and historical point, that something happens in the cremation ground such that women start to become involved in the practice in a much more serious way than ever before. Prior to this point, prior to this shift, this turning point, it was mostly just like celibate men, who were either by themselves or in small groups of celibate men, like monks, ascetics, practicing. But now they had consorts, and not only that, now gurus weren't just men. Usually, if you were in the cremation ground, you would go seek out a guru. He was probably a man, a celibate ascetic, who would give you a mantra, and then you would practice and maybe live with him for a while and then go off and do your thing on your own. But now you could be initiated by a woman, and arguably that was way more desirable. So in the case of Jnānaṁ or Shivananda, the one who founds the Kramāt tradition, allegedly, he's in a cremation ground. What is now modern day Pakistan. And there he encounters the goddess. So now she makes an appearance, if you will. Now, this person could have actually been a human being. Her name was Mangala Devī. That was what he called her. So Mangala means the auspicious one. So he could have met. It's possible that he had a darshan, an experience of Kālī, or the goddess who lives in that cremation ground, who administered knowledge to him. But it's also possible that this is just a euhemerized, or rather divinized, exalted female teacher who taught him this stuff. To these yoginīs, like we encounter in the text, Chuma Sanketa Prakasha and whatnot. So there are yoginīs now, like actual human women who are practicing in the cremation ground. And maybe some of them have always lived there. Like they're chandalinis, they're women who grew up in families who live in the cremation ground. They're like outcast women who practice more autochthonous forms of spirituality, in which like spirits are worshipped, invoked and worshipped with things like liquor and sexual fluids, in which like there's more fluidity around sexual norms and purity principles. It could be that. It could be that these women were chandalinis, from Chandala kind of communities. But it also could be the case that these were high caste brahmanas, like Sri Ramakrishna's guru. His guru in Tantra was a woman, and she was a brahmani. She was a Brahmin woman. But she would wear her hair wild, like a prostitute's. Her hair was red. Sorry, clothes were red, like that. Like she was a Tāntrik. And as a Tāntrik, she would spend time in the cremation ground, and she taught Sri Ramakrishna all the cremation ground sadhanas of the Bhairava Agamas. So she would sit with him in the cremation ground. There's that beautiful picture where he's sitting under the bael tree or the amalaki tree or something, and he's performing sadhana, and he's got like a bowl of what looks like wine or blood, and there's a jackal coming to drink the bowl, and he's like doing japa, and Bhairavi Brahmani standing next to him with her trident in her red clothes with one hand on his head or something like that. You've seen this picture? It's a painting. It's a Bengali portrait of Sri Ramakrishna during the time of his cremation ground, smashan sadhana, under the guidance of a Brahmin woman who would spend time in cremation ground. So I think if you think that it's just Chandalinis, I think that's not fair. I think there were a lot of women who were also equally interested in the same ideal that I've just been sketching out for you in the past 30 or so minutes. So like the women also would come into it. But arguably before this, they weren't allowed. Like before this, the woman would not be participating in such an immediate kind of way. But already we're breaking all the rules, So there's already a lot of innovation. And now the greatest, arguably the most interesting innovation is that now there are more women like physically like present in the smashan with you, with whom you are relating in ritual contexts. So there are more human women. But then you could say the reason there are more human women is because now there are more female spirits and a stronger presence of a female kind of deity. And you could say it's a chicken and egg, or I should say a peacock and egg sort of thing, because you can't really say, oh, is it because they started worshiping the goddess that women showed up? Or is it because women showed up that they started worshiping the goddess? Who knows? But somehow or other, the goddess was cognized, discovered in the smashan. And her influence upon the early Shaivas was very interesting because now they started worshiping in partnered groups in like an orgiastic way, in a way that was transgressive, using liquor and various other fluids and whatnot. So all of that kind of corresponds a little bit to the sudden emergence of the goddess cult. So we call these people Kapalikas or the yogini kula, if you will. And that's because they worshipped yoginīs. They worshipped mātrikās, yoginīs, dakinis. They started to worship not just Rudra, by now his name is like Bhairava, but they also started to worship Bhairava's consort or consorts. So now Rudra, otherwise known as Bhairava, comes with his consort. And that's obviously there in the Puranas. Like you see that Shiva is never without his Shakti. There's always Parvati. The Shaiva Siddhanta, the more orthodox, dualistic, Brahmanical form of the tradition, accepts Shakti. But it's really in the cremation ground that Shakti is being encountered in such an immediate and tangible way. And look at her effect on sadhana. It becomes transgressive and it becomes power oriented. So now the conversation about siddhis becomes more important. Before this, it was all about just moksha. It was about going beyond all suffering, and it was about maybe attaining Shivatva or something like that. But now what it meant to go beyond all suffering, now what it meant to attain Shivatva is to be empowered even in this world. So the spiritual ideal starts shifting also from something that looks like Videha Mukti, which is the liberation you can only enjoy after you kick the body, to something that looks more like Jivan Mukti, liberation that you can enjoy while in the body. Now the goal is to become Bhairava, not just to worship Bhairava and like be with him in some like Bhairava Loka or something, but to actually here and now identify oneself with Bhairava and his various consorts, or to become Devī and identify yourself with her various consorts. So now you start to see a movement towards Advaita. There's a sort of non-duality arising within the Shaiva, mostly dualistic and qualified non-dualistic traditions. There's more goddess orientation. So you start to think about Devī a little bit more. And the further left you go, the more Advaitic you become, in a sense, the more transgressive you become, in a sense, and the more goddess-oriented you become. So if you keep going left to something like the Maharta or the Krama or something, like Shiva gets swallowed up in the end also. So the way that Shiva was worshipped without Shakti, Shakti also to the extreme left is worshipped without Shiva. Here she's called Eka Vira, the single heroine, the single goddess or something like that. But in any case, this movement towards Shakti, I think it's significant because it shows an innovation within the Shaiva Tantric tradition where there's more transgression, there's more female gurus, more female disciples, more female practitioners, more partnered practice, and also more emphasis on Advaita and on the goddess. And undoubtedly on power. So you can call these early Kāpālika movements or early Yogini Kula movements like cults of power. They were interested in propitiating certain forces in the cremation ground in order that they may be empowered by them. So here's the idea. And by the way, in the Shaiva world, and this could be because of the influence of like tribal communities that lived in those areas anyway, there's a big emphasis on something called avesha. Avesha means possession. And even in the most exalted, refined, non-dual Brahmanical texts like Somananda, and by Brahmanical I mean text composed by high-class Brahmins like Somananda, you see constant references to this word. And Abhinava Gupta works really hard to like reinterpret the word avesha in light of his non-dual theology. So samavesha, it has the connotation of possession, either to be possessed by the Devī or deity, or to possess the deity. So possession, avesha. And these could be very ecstatic, very scary. And the idea is that it's empowering. So in the cremation ground, you meet vampires like Vetalas, you meet Bhutas, and you meet Pisachas. And these aren't deities, but they can still help out. Because they're not bound in the way we are to time and space, because they've come unstuck a little bit, they might be able to tell something of the future that we can't see. They might be able to give us extra strength, or even to give us a rush. At the very least, they might give us a thrill. And so in the Smashan, you start seeing like things like the propitiation of ghosts, like Vetalas, Bhutas, Pishachas. And then through the propitiating of ghosts, people get power to start propitiating other classes of beings that are all now in the magical context present only in the cremation ground, like these yoginis and dakinis. And now, much like these ghosts, they're quite ferocious and very unstable. And the characterization of these dakinis is like they're very banshee-like. They have wild hair and fangs. They're usually naked. They're exceedingly fond of liquor and exceedingly fond of sex. So the idea is that they want to be worshipped with sexual fluids. They're fond of that kind of energy, and they like to be worshipped with blood. So they're rudhira priya. They're bloodthirsty, inebriated, sexually oriented, transgressive, unpredictable energies. So all of this is spoken of in a magical sense. Do they really exist? Are there really banshee type spirits? Hey, if you know, right? And that's why we're warned about certain sadhanas. Like if you chant their mantras, if you dip your hibiscus flowers in semen and put them in the fire, see what happens. Energies are attracted to energies. And if you worship with that energy, I mean, you'll maybe get a response from a similar kind of energy. So the purpose, though, in the Smashan at this point, in the Kāpālika Yogini Kula, was to contact these energies, these scary forces. You could say it's like the cremation ground was already edgy enough, right? But now that they've been there for a while, level 2 is to contact the energies of the cremation ground, which are even edgier, these dakinis, yoginis. And the goal was to be really possessed by them, to worship them, to invoke them, and then to have them enter the body so that they would empower you and then exalt you to the status of Bhairava. So maybe even give you various other kinds of siddhis. So you have to worship them with blood. They are rudhira priya. You have to worship them with intoxicants. They like liquor. You have to worship them with sex. And this is the idea. Sometimes they would possess your Shakti, your consort, your duti. So the idea was to have your duti get possessed and then make love to the dakini through your duti. And that would be a way to please the dakini. So the dakini or the yogini is pleased through your sexual activity. And the idea is that they're quite insatiable. That's why poor Matsyendranatha, once he got trapped in this Dakini Loka, in which he was kept as a sex slave, Because if you do a lot of spiritual practice, you get a lot of ojas, a lot of virya, and that's very attractive to Dakinis. Arguably, if you do a lot of sadhana, they say that the semen that you carry has more potency. Semen is already a very magical substance. Menses, menstrual blood, is of course a very magical substance because it's creative. But not all menses is the same. Not all semen is the same. Menses from a yogini and semen from a yogi is particularly potent, particularly magical. So the more sadhana you do, the more attractive you become to these banshee-like unpredictable forces of the cremation ground who either want to possess you and control you and like derange you, or who want to like steal all your sexual virility and power, or who want to drink all of your blood. So they're like vampires. They're energy vampires. They're blood vampires. They're like succubi and incubi, and like they're somewhat terrifying forces. But, and this is very important, they're all of them, as it were, controlled by a Bhairava in the middle ground of the tradition. So Bhairava is specifically, or Rudra is specifically that being who is not mastered by these forces, but who is able to master them, or rather, channel them or control them or something like that. Then Bhairava gets swapped out for Kālī. So now Kālī is that one energy who emanates out as all of these wild-haired, naked, and screaming banshee-type dakinis and yoginis. So either it's Kālī or either it's Bhairava, but now there is one central Shaktiman, one central controller of energy. So it's a dangerous game because if you aren't Bhairava, if you don't attain that same level of control, then you will be easily overwhelmed by such energies. You could be easily torn to shreds by these violent forces of the cremation ground. Better not to court disaster, better not to court madness, better not to fuck around and find out. Unless you have the confidence of Bhairava. So now they started dressing the part. They carried a trident, they would smear themselves in ash, eat only out of skull bowls, wear mortuary symbols. It's like the same logic of Halloween. If you're going to be interfacing with scary things, you yourself should be considerably scary. Otherwise, you'll be bossed around. Otherwise, you'll go there and the demons will tear you to shreds. So you have to be a gana yourself, a demon yourself, to be able to like withstand these forces, and harness them and channelize them. It's a remarkable thing. So all of this, I'm speaking about all of this in magical terms. Later on, these practices will be interiorized. They'll be turned into metaphors. And Sri Ramakrishna often spoke in this way when it came to things like psychological issues that would otherwise be disturbing, but could actually be reclaimed for the purposes of spirituality. So you can see that there's an interior metaphorical way to understand all of this, but actually a lot of people understand it in a more literal sense, that there are literally these energies in the cremation ground who literally enjoy offerings of menses and semen, who literally like liquor, and who will actually literally have sex with you, either in your dream or astrally or through your consort. And that's like for both partners. Not to be gender normative here, but if you are a Bhairavi, you can have sex with one of these Vetalas or Dakas, they're called, yogis or Dakas, through your Bhairava, through your consort. And vice versa, if you are a Bhairava or a yogi, you can enjoy, or not enjoy, but actually propitiate, rather, these Dakinis or yoginis through your Shakti, through your Bhairavi. So either like metaphysically in a dream or in a meditative context, or literally through actual intercourse, you would try to satisfy these Dakinis or Dakas, and also with offerings of various other transgressive things. So this is arguably the foundation of what would later become Kālī. So a lot of what we know about Kālī, its roots are in this mortuary tradition, cremation ground culture. Okay. So now here's the myth, not a myth, but here's the icon, the image, if you will. On a new moon night, a Bhairava goes to the smashan, and he's there with his consort, who sits to his left. And he starts performing rituals, maybe even offering with his left hand, where he's supposed to offer into the fire with his right hand. He instead offers with his left hand. His dhuni is not some sacred fire, it is a funeral pyre. His clothes are mostly garments that he can find from dead bodies, skull necklaces, bone bracelets. He has to his right some trident, and there's a cloth tied around his trident, which is dipped in blood, a very impure substance. And there he is, seated with matted locks, covered in ash, and with his dhuti to one side, with his trident to the other. He performs rituals in the middle of the night, on a Tuesday or on a Saturday under the new moon night. And as he's offering with his left hand or something into the fire, his oblation, his offering, is itself quite ghastly. Perhaps it's bits of meat, or perhaps it's some kind of liquor, or perhaps it's a kind of flower dipped in his own semen or the menses of his Shakti. And as he's doing this, he's calling all of these spirits. And then they come and they appear, and now he has to make a blood sacrifice. And if he fails to make the blood sacrifice, they will tear him to shreds. He'll go mad. And he might kill himself or something like that. Or he might just be inexplicably found dead the next day. His heart might have stopped. Or he might live the rest of his life robbed of virility and joy and creativity, because now he's perpetually in melancholic states. Who knows? All sorts of things can happen. And I've seen things like this actually in people in my own family, like how their whole lives change because, they get possessed or something. Psychological issues. A lot of this manifests as derangement and lethargy and things like that. So there are real considerable risks here. And sometimes these people are just found straight up dead. Like there's like SUDs. But anyway, so they call all these spirits at their own risk. And when these spirits come, now it's a test of wills. Is the spirit stronger than me or am I stronger than the spirit? And that's true also of like drinking spirits. When you drink the alcohol, who's in control here? Because if you don't take control of the alcohol, you'll end up saying things and doing things that you later regret. And then when you come to the next day, you'll be like, I don't know what possessed me to say those things or do those things. Well, I know what possessed you to say those things and do those things. Yoginis and dakinis, these spirits that are present in the spirits. So you're drinking alcohol, you're probably doing some kind of intoxicant, you're worshiping in the fire, you're calling these energies. At any time you could be overwhelmed and plunged into more samsara, more entanglement. But for the rare practitioner, for the one who is established in some real sadhana, whose goals are quite pure and sincere, who is clear about what he wants to achieve, when these yoginis and dakinis come, he stands to them not as prey to the predator, not as, you know, a weak kind of pushover to be like torn to shreds. He stands to them as a Bhairava to his flock, to his tribe, his ovali, or his, yeah, tribe, I guess is a good word, his clan, his gang, if you will, his kula, his family. And so when these Bhairavis come, pleased with his worship, these yoginis and dakinis will then impart upon him wisdom and power. So that's the important. That's what he wants. He wants maybe just power, but probably also wisdom, because wisdom is also power. So through them he can attain wisdom, and through them he can attain moksha. So now instead of propitiating Rudra, the absolute, it's better just propitiate these yoginis and these dakinis, and it's better to propitiate the primordial dakini, the mother of all dakinis, the yogini par excellence, who we start to call Kālī. So this is just the background for where the imagery of Kali might come from. It comes from the cremation ground, and that's why you can't quite take her out of that setting. All of her dhyana mantras describe her as being covered in blood and impure substance, surrounded by jackals who are seen as impure animals. She's wearing mortuary symbolism like garlands of skulls or serpent bracelets. She's herself bloody and naked like a prostitute or a chandala. Her hair is wild and free. A woman of civilized society would braid her hair to show the control and restraint of her sensuality, but Kali is unrestrained in that way. She's a very sexual being, very empowered in her sexuality, very free and very violent. A woman is told not to speak too loudly or not to shout or not to like harm anyone. Kali doesn't follow such rules. So she's Vame, she's Vama Kali, she's always interested in subverting and transgressing whatever rule, whatever regulation, whatever convention you can put in front of her. So her worshippers were also interested in those things. That's how you get the Vamachara and the Kaula, and Kali is for the most part associated to these things. That's why she's also really feared, because her image represents, as Kelebe was saying earlier, it represents a kind of ungrounded disregard for convention structures and institutions, which would otherwise give us a sense of solace, familiarity, and stability. How very Shiva of us. Do you know what I mean? Like Shiva, this is what he does. He transgresses, he overturns in the name of creativity. So again, I think a higher teaching here is you have to dare to be an individual, and you have to dare to do things. I mean, it makes no sense just following the footsteps of those who came before. You could do that, but you have to do it in your own way. And that's what these people are doing. And they were innovating, they were discovering stuff. It was being taught to them by the yoginis and the dakinis. So what we know of Tantra is considerable, like the language and the mantras and all the ritual technologies. Maybe we learned them by contacting these forces in the cremation ground. So Shiva and Kali, even when they're worshipped in the home, there's always that some semblance, of that kshetra, that pita, that wild and untrammeled place beyond all conventions, rules, and structures. A place where wild and erratic and violent forces live to be contacted, ultimately propitiated and won over in order that one may attain power and vidya, most of all vidya, knowledge. Cool. You're all still hanging in there? I think we're like 2 hours in, and I'm just now finishing with some historical, cultural, and magical points, and I'm about to enter into some philosophical stuff. Are you still okay? Marlene hanging in there? Katyayani is good. Now that Katyayani is at home, she can just stay up all night. She doesn't have to wake up at 4:30 in the morning right now, so Okay, I hope you're all hanging in there. Sorry, I just got a few more things I want to say, and then we can open for an extended Q&A. So anyway, a lot of these things, like the use of transgressive substances, like in the case of the panchamakaras, like when we offer meat and fish and wine and intoxicants, and when we offer copulation or intercourse, and also not just any kind of intercourse, but intercourse with a woman of low standing. So like intercourse with like a courtesan who is of a very low class, like that. So things like this. All of that you can trace back to these early Chandala type situations, but they're still practiced by brahmanas of very high standing, like Abhinava Gupta and like Somananda allegedly. They might have been doing these practices, but not in the cremation ground. They're doing them in their living rooms, arguably, in their estates, because many of these brahmanas were also very rich kids. Like Abhinava Gupta had inherited a beautiful property from his ancestor Ati Gupta, who was a court pundit like that. So now they don't have to go to the cremation ground. They have the privacy of their own home, but they had to be very careful to keep this a secret because they would lose caste. They would be excommunicated from the upper echelons of society if anybody were to find out that they were engaging in these ghastly, uncivilized, barbaric, power-seeking magical practices of the smashan. So this is really interesting. Now another shift occurs. So I've talked now about the more magical aspect. Now moving into a philosophical thing, a second, arguably a third shift occurs. And it's this. All of these practices start to get interiorized. They start to become a little bit more metaphorical and a little less literal. Oh ma, Jai Masha. Jai ma, Jai ma, get some good rest. Oh, sorry, East Coast friends. This will be recorded and uploaded anyway. But YouTube will probably ban me again. Anyway, so this is very, very important. A group of people maybe engaging with these practices start to like internalize them such that these magical forces that were hitherto seen as independent external entities, they're now conceived of as interior to one's own conscious experience. And so now the non-dual traditions start to develop very refined philosophies. And this you can see in the Trika. And this, of course, you can see in Somananda, who we've been studying a lot recently. So Somananda is talking about Shiva as the absolute, but he has a big emphasis on power, on desire, on will, on action, on dynamism. And that is the emphasis on Shakti. So Somananda, like I was saying 2 weeks ago, might be giving us the foundational Śakta philosophical worldview that this entire universe is composed of power, and that power is one and the same with consciousness. And by consciousness, by Shiva, we mean consciousness. And by consciousness, we mean the one reality which I am. So this is where you start to see very refined and sophisticated philosophical interpretations of what's going on in the smashan, of what we're discovering in the smashan. So now, switching into some philosophy, here's what happens arguably. People start worshipping Rudra, and they start worshipping Shiva, as Pashupati, Sadashiva, etc. And then they find in that silence and stillness. And they realize that Shiva is not necessarily just this anthropomorphic form. Shiva is the all-pervasive, spacious, formless, and maybe even in one sense, actionless, impersonal reality. This is the realization of Advaita Vedanta, that far beyond God is something called Godhead. You can start worshipping any god. You can start with anyone, Krishna, you can take Jesus, whatever form you want, you can worship that form. And then you'll realize through worshipping that form that the whole time you've been worshipping the formless, impersonal, spacious reality, which is called consciousness, which you are. So Sri Ramakrishna gave a beautiful metaphor. He said, imagine that a god or a deity or a particular anthropomorphic form is like a hole in the wall. So you can imagine like a Shiva-shaped hole or a Ramakrishna-shaped hole. And when you look through that hole, you see the sky. Now, when you're standing far away, it looks like the light has a shape. But the closer and closer you go, the more and more you realize that it's a hole. And when you look through the hole, you see the sky, the source of all that light. And you realize God was never a shape in the wall. God was a space beyond the wall. God was never a form in the mind, though that form was helpful in accessing that which was beyond the mind. So I want to present the smashan now in a more metaphorical way. I like doing things literally, because doing things literally in the world that I inhabit, in this physical world, can help me articulate and access these things metaphorically. So maybe going to the smashan can help you do this, but it certainly isn't necessary, because I want to present the smashan, the cremation ground now, as a pure metaphor. It is a realm beyond all conventions, not the conventions of society that are externally enforced, but the conventions that you yourself tyrannize yourself with by internally enforcing them in your own mind. You are a brahmana to yourself. You are the manusmriti to yourself. You have your own code of conduct, and it might or might not be informed by what your parents told you, what your teachers told you and tutors told you, what your culture told you. Good night, Salvatore. So in any case, we're all of us kind of carrying around this structure in our heads that tell us how to be and who to be. And this is a prison, yet it's familiar. It gives us solace. It gives us stability. And so we much rather stay in the prison that we know than venture out into the wild, untrammeled country of the dakinis and yoginis. Because God forbid, if we were to step out of those cherished structures of rules and structures of order and regulation, we might become susceptible to wild forces in our psyche. So now start to think of the dakinis and yoginis not as external energies that will feed on your blood and like drive you mad. They are psychological stirrings within the deep recesses of your mind. Primordial lust, primordial anger, primordial greed, and God knows what else is in there. You know, there's that beautiful Ram Prasad song where he would say, "Oh, look at that beautiful cat, Durga's lion." So, so cute. Cats are very beloved to the goddess, you know, Sekhmet in Egypt, but of course Durga and her lion and whatnot. So very fond of cats. But anyway, we're very fond of animals in the smashan too, because we're trying to contact a subconscious way of thinking. Jai Ma, Jai Ma, Jai Ma. So anyway, that I'm on a tangent. So when you slip into that part of the mind, like in that Ram Prasad song, it's like, dive down deep. Kali's jewels are strewn at the bottom of the ocean. The ocean here is a metaphor for the subconscious mind. But be careful, down at the bottom of the lake, the 6 alligators are lurking. You know, all the various psychological problems that we have that are always threatening to disrupt society. Like, for instance, lust is always threatening to upset marital situations. Greed is always threatening to disrupt law and order. Anger is always threatening to disrupt peace. Like, it's even called disruption of the peace, you know, by the authorities. So these are all disruptive forces that are usually kind of negative in nature. So it's better that you don't contact them at all, because if you touch them, if you go into the smashan of your subconscious and you don't know how to handle yourself there, you will be possessed by these forces. If you tap into those dark energies, they might flood into your conscious mind and totally overwhelm you and ruin your life. So it's better to stay in your prison, because at least your crypt, at least your prison has walls that keep them out, although they keep you in. That's the idea. So what will you choose? The relative safety of your prison, or the wild, untrammeled land of the subconscious, in which dakinis and yoginis roam about bloodthirsty, craving sex and liquor and blood? Like, oh my God. So this journey into the depths is what this tradition is all about. And the role of the guru, therefore, becomes very important as somebody who can anchor us and guide us in that dream journey, if you will, into the very deepest recesses of our psychology. So basically, this tradition asks you to do one thing: step out of all your conventions, go to the smashan and figure out who you are. But that means come face to face with your own darknesses. What are your hang-ups? What are your aversions? What are the things that cause you to feel proud or ashamed? What do you hate? What do you fear? All of these things have to be reassessed and stared at. And then what do you want? All of these desires, for so long you've been repressing them. Especially if you're a woman, you've been conditioned by society to feel that your desires are maybe unholy or dangerous to your family structure or somehow indulgent or selfish. That's why a lot of people who are interested in like Lilith or Hecate come to Kali, because they recognize in Kali what they see in Lilith, what they see in Hecate, which is a kind of like dark femme energy, I guess, where it's kind of like, look, I'm just going to be an empowered woman and make my own choices based on my own values. So things like women's reproductive rights, like women's sexuality, women's financial freedom, women's like mobility, all of that is included in this discussion also. But it's not just women. I mean, it's especially women, because women for so long have been so subjugated to these rules, the rules that men have imposed on the women, but equally men, because those rules are also imposed on them. And the myriads of people who are in the liminal space. That's why the LGBT and Kali work very well together. Like if you're a trans person, like obviously Kali is very like perfect. because she's a liminal person. Like she exists in that liminality, not just between cultures and nations, between spirit and matter, but between genders, between the left brain and the right brain. She's at every crossroads, if you will. So whether you're a person who sticks to the gender binary, which is perfectly fine, or a person who's coming unstuck from the gender binary, whether you're a woman or a man, and we argue, especially if you're a woman, you probably are tyrannized by lots of things: pride, shame, hatred, aversions, attachments, all of those things. But we're never going to do anything about them because we don't even want to look at them. No, we never want to resolve any of these issues. So the smashan beckons. It beckons all those psychonauts who would dare to look in and see what there is, in the hopes of finding the jewels, of course. It's not a mere morbid fascination with the darkness. It's a quest for power, empowerment, but it's also a quest for knowledge, which we understand to be one and the same thing. And to do that, to get that knowledge and power, one has to walk through the valley of the shadow of death or something. One has to come to LA, I guess, and hang out with the vampires on Ventura Boulevard. All a very wonderful metaphor. Okay, so now, having said all of this, think of the Dakinis and Yoginis now as psychological forces, and think of Kali also as the absolute reality, which does not exist above and beyond this world, above, outside and independent of you, but exists within you. So the deepest aspect of your being now, we'll call Kali, or we'll call Shiva. So going back to that metaphor of seeing a hole in the wall. So you're looking through the hole and you're seeing the sky. And maybe this is what happened to many of the early worshippers of Rudra, the early worshippers of Shiva. They were meditating and meditating and meditating, and they had attained a subtler, more refined understanding of God, going beyond the form, arguably, going beyond any limitation of sect or of deity. They had discovered God as pure formless consciousness. You can get this flavor in the beginning of the Vijnana Bhairava too, where you see Shiva is making a case for the absolute being formless, pure consciousness, not a particular anthropomorphic form. Look at that verse. It says, Dhyanam hi nischala buddhi nirakara nirashayam. Natu dhyanam sharirakshi mukhahastati kalpana. Meditation is not, natu dhyanam, but meditation is not visualizing kalpana, a deity with arms or a face or eyes or weapons or hands or anything like that. What is meditation? Keeping the mind unwaveringly fixed in that groundless, supportless, indivisible reality. Puja is not offering flowers or semen-soaked hibiscus into a fire, like none of that. Puja is dissolving into the void in the heart, which is free of all thought constructs. So like this, in the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, you can see that this formless interpretation of God is being explored. So the early Shaivas might have encountered this. God is formless. And in the beginning, this formlessness might have appeared to be like silence, a profound and absolute kind of silence. And it might have been perceived as stillness, a deep, abiding stillness, like the mountain whose roots are deep in the earth, an unshakable, immovable mountain, Nishchala or Sthira. And not just that, the sky with its vast luminosity, its emptiness. So the experience of space, silence, stillness, emptiness, this might have been the experience of Shiva. But again, it's void without luminosity. It's silence without sound. It's stillness without meaning, without dynamism. In other words, it's a corpse. What have you attained at this point but death, a kind of veiled and subtle suicide? You've become dead to your body, dead to your mind, dead to the world. And for what? A little bit of peace? The walls have peace. The rocks have peace, if that's how you're going to define things. So like I was saying before this lecture, Jayaratha makes fun of these yogis who are in this state of meditative torpor. They're no better than beings who are in deep sleep. I mean, slightly better maybe because they're more conscious and lucid, but they're essentially deeply sleeping. They turned off the movie of life because it was too scary for them. Is this really what liberation means to you? A kind of veiled suicide? You were so upset by the world, by the suffering in samsara, that you wanted to like get out, but you realized suicide would never do it because you would just keep reincarnating. So you just found this like meta suicide in which you like never have to reincarnate. And for what? So you can abide in this state of meditative stupor, like stewing in the void, like a rock, like a coiled serpent sleeping, like a wall. Is that your destiny ultimately? Emptiness, void, silence, stillness, peace? God forbid, peace. That's another crypt, isn't it? So now we come to something else. Having discovered this void, we discovered that it was a corpse, but it was not lifeless. For within that silence was a sound, was a resonance, the hysterical laughing of a mad woman, if you will. And within that hysterical laughter, within that primordial vibration, were all the letters of the Sanskrit alphabet, from all the way through to ksha, or more importantly, from all the way through to ha. So is the first letter. You say ha is the last letter, 49 syllables. What does that spell? Aham, I am. So in that silence, in that stillness, there was a dynamic, resonating affirmation of being, a fullness, an unbelievable dynamic fullness. And it says, I am, I am, I am. And that aham is conceived of as language, the Shabda Rashi, the sum total of all sounds. The primordial sounds are the aksharas, whether you're thinking in terms of matrika or malini. Matrika is the through to ksha or through to ha, and malini is na through to pa. There are different ways of arranging the Sanskrit syllables. In any case, all of the Sanskrit syllables are primordial sounds. They're not cultural or anything. They're like just supposed to be metaphysically there and present in all languages. But those primordial sound structures contain within them all the sound, all the resonance. And it verily is self-reflexive awareness, that vimarshana. So pure non-dual, spacious reality is self-aware. And that's what they discovered, that in that deep silence, there was sound, there was speech. It's called paravak. And it has the form of vimarshana, meaning self-reflexive I amness. So it's sahaja, it's natural, it's a natural sense of I am. And that's what we call Shakti. So Shakti, power, vimarsha Shakti, is none other than this language, this articulation, this uchara, this paravak, supreme word. Okay, so that's the first thing to understand. It's language, it's sound, it's mantra. The second thing to understand is that it's dynamism. So within this stillness, couched deep in stillness, is dynamism. So this is Somananda's entire emphasis. When he's talking about Shiva, he talks about Shiva as the formless. He says it's amurtva. It doesn't have any substance. It's pure consciousness. It's no it at all. It's you. It's what you are. Your conscious being is Shiva. But he emphasizes again and again the powers that are inherent and inalienable from that Shiva, which is consciousness. So these powers are a triad in Somananda. The first one is called Icha, the second one is called Jnana, and the third one is called Kriya. Icha is the power to will, and Jnana and Kriya are the powers to know and to do. So like the reality, which is non-dual, desires to know and to do. And so this entire universe is an expression of that desire. From desire it comes, in desire it lives, and into desire it dissolves. And it's a desire to just be Marlene or be Viranata or just whatever, whoever's here. Like all of you are here because Lord Shiva desires to know and to do through you. And that will, Somananda obsesses over. Like he's obsessed, arguably, in that text, Shiva Drishti, with the concept of will, with volition. So the absolute is a volitional, dynamic, willing, desiring reality. So that desire, that will, that dynamism, we call Shakti. Now, the reason why Shakti is inalienable from Shiva is because if Shiva was without Shakti, he would be no better than a corpse. We say Shiva without Icha, this gives you a clue as to what Shakti is. Shiva without Icha is Shava. See, the Sanskrit Shava, if you put the E, it becomes Shiva. But if you take out the Icha, in other words, if you take out the E from the Shi, it becomes Sha. And then Shava. Shava means corpse. So Shiva without desire is a corpse. And Abhinava Gupta tells us he would not be Maheshwara if he was not endowed with this power to create, maintain, destroy, reveal, and conceal. If God was not empowered, he would not be God. And more importantly, if this reality was not self-reflexively aware, to put it in more philosophical terms, then it would be no better than a pot. It would be no better than a nihilistic void. It would be nothing but dry, suicidal advice. Do you see? It would be nothing but nihilism. And that's what so many spiritual traditions kind of descend into. Because what they're suggesting is dry suicidal advice, to use Swami Vivekananda's language in the 1896 October lecture called God in Everything. Like, you're scared of the movie, so you turn it off. Like, how sad. Isn't an orgasm beautiful? Isn't running beautiful? Isn't watching a sunset beautiful? Isn't losing a loved one beautiful? Isn't watching your house burn down beautiful? Isn't a cancer that degenerates your flesh and bones beautiful? Isn't birth beautiful? Isn't death beautiful? Isn't aging beautiful? All of that is beautiful. It's horrific in that it's so many overwhelming emotions, but it's meaningful. It's like a poem or a story or a movie. And just because it was scary sometime doesn't mean that you should turn it off. And this is what we're all trying to do. We're all trying to commit suicide and we're calling it spirituality. And the first people in the world who are going to suffer as a result of this view are women. They will be cursed for their wombs, because it is through that womb that I came into this world of hellfire and impurity and degeneration. If I fail to see this as a beautiful world, I will curse the womb that ferried me into it. But if I recognize this world as a place full of meaning and beauty and poetry and delight, then the womb will be a place of great reverence and sanctity. The yoni would be my highest symbol. The downward pointing triangle would represent to me my highest ideal, not the upward pointing triangle of transcendence, that which takes me out of this doomed and degenerate and debased world, but the downward pointing triangle. I would recognize finally that the nervous system is dependent on the hormonal system. I would recognize finally that fire depends on water. I would recognize that man depends on woman, that my conscious mind must give way to my subconscious, that my math and logic must descend into madness, into the babbling of babies and poetry. That's what must happen. I must recognize that there are no borders, no boundaries, and that I live in the liminal space always, dancing mad with joy, without any clothes on, beyond all notion of pure and impure, with the dakinis and yoginis of the cremation ground. So this is what Kālī is teaching us, arguably. So when Somananda looked, when he went to the smashan, and when he looked, he found Ma. Because at the heart of Shiva, the silence and stillness, was this beating, pulsating, throbbing reality, which Vasugupta and which Kalata Bhatta called spanda, this paraspanda, this throb, how do you say, oscillation, spadi kinchit chalane, like it's chalane, it's little. It's kinchit chalane, it's a little stirring, but it's spadi nonetheless. So spanda, the root is spadi kinchit chalane, it means throb, pulse, arousal. Like the reality, this universe is aroused. It's thrumming with desire and creative potential. And this is what the Shaivas in the Smashan and various other places discovered when they looked into Shiva. So this is why when we look at the text, we hear things from Shittikanta like Shiva svabhaveva Shakti na vastvantaram ityekameva Shiva vyapadesham Shakti vyapadesham cha vastu tattvam na purvam kinchit. The essential reality called Shiva is known as Shakti. So what is essential about Shiva is Shakti, the Swabhava. The essence of Lord Shiva is Shakti. Shiva Swabhava iti Shakti, says Abhinava Gupta also in one other place. There is no other reality. Because remember, this is infinite. So the infinite is non-dual. Nothing exists outside of the infinite reality. And so this reality called Shiva is verily Shakti. In fact, Shakti is the essence of Shiva. There's nothing outside of that. Shiva vyapadesham, Shakti vyapadesham. Iti ekam, it's one. Iti ekam eva. It is only one thing that is being called Shiva and being called Shakti. And what is that one thing? And that's the idea, that it's consciousness imbued with dynamic potential. Remember, without the dynamic potential, it doesn't have the reflexive self-awareness. It wouldn't be able to repose in itself and say, I am. At that point, you've lost theism, but you've also lost value, meaning. You've lost being, and you've been reduced to non-being. But not only that, you've lost power, and power is desirable to us, those of us who practice in the Kaula Marga. Power is synonymous with knowledge, and it's not power over others. The only people who need to have power over others are the powerless. If they would be empowered even once, they would leave everything well and good alone. They would leave everyone alone. They would stop going out into the world and trying to steal money or like manipulate people into sleeping with them. They would stop like trying to win the elections and become presidents. They wouldn't need all of those things because they would be so filled to the brim with the wine of Kālī. So Utpala Deva, he says, all I want, O Lord, having attained the highest non-dual reality, he says, all I want is to dance in the cremation ground. Again, he says that I want to dance in the cremation ground, drinking the liquor, again, a reference to the early traditions, of devotion. I want to drink the liquor of devotion, chant thy name, and dance mad with joy in the cremation ground with my friends, the nine ghosts. This is very important because the nine ghosts represent the nine arpachers, the anus, the genitals, the two eyes, the two nose, the mouth, the ears. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There are 9 apertures through which prana enters and through which prana exits. In other words, through which I interface with this reality, which is really not external to consciousness. These 9 ghosts shut down. They close off when I go into samadhi. When I go into myself, I leave my body and the world behind. But that's not what Utpala Deva, the great Shaivacharya, wants. In his Shiva Sutravali, in the end, he says, what I want is to stay awake. I want to be in this world. And we saw this language from Sri Ramakrishna again and again and again. He would say, oh, mother, I don't want to be a dry monk. Don't make me a dry monk. See, he's praying to the Divine Mother that he won't default to silence without sound. He won't default to stillness without dynamism. He's praying that Ma won't make him a dry monk, like all those jñānīs, who are absorbed in the nihilistic void. He says instead, Ma, make me Bhava Raja, the king of all mental moods. Please, I want to stay here and sing and dance and enjoy the company of fellow devotees. Here I can eat and drink and make merry. This is language that we got from Sri Ramakrishna, the Śakta of Śaktas, the priest of Ma Kālī par excellence. So this is what he learned, arguably, in all of his cremation ground sadhanas, in all of his various sadhanas, especially is what he learned as a priest in the Kali temple of Dakshineshwar. From serving Kali, he learned that this world is beautiful. It is to be enjoyed. It is a mansion of mirth, not a framework of illusion. He learned that consciousness is not void, but is radiant with sound and light and dynamism. And he was positive and loving and didn't think that one religion was right and other religions were wrong. He was the perfect embodiment of the divine feminine. And this is what we're being called to when we approach Kali. Die to your masculinity, is what we're saying. If what it means by masculinity is logic, boundaries, reason, if what we mean by masculinity is structure, let her take them all. Swaha, we say. Because when the logical mind dissolves into the subconscious, when we know true madness, not the pathological madness of our society, which many people consider to be sanity, but the true madness of devotion, that's what we call power. So we say power is the goddess, Shakti, and I want power. I want to be empowered because I want to be possessed by her. I want to say truly and emphatically, Mother, I am the chariot, you are the driver. Tumi rati, ami rata. I want to say, ami jantra, tumi jantri. You are the operator, I am the machine. This is the language of Tāntrik possession, avesha. I want to be possessed by the Mother because if she possesses me, then I will possess her. If she tries to eat me, I will eat her. And then she'll see what kind of child I am. Ram Prasad has a song like that. So I want to be devoured by the dakinis. I'm standing out here in the open beyond all reason, naked and available to all these dakinis to come and drink my blood because I believe fully that it's not worth holding on to, this flesh, this blood, this mind. So that's in one sense what we're being invited to. This radiant void, this dynamic stillness. So coming back to the literature, we have these claims about Shakti. So, evam adho eva Shakti spandana shila bahir vishayonmukhi. In fact, Aunmukhya is a term that Somananda uses a lot. So this is from Shittikanta in a text known as Mahanaya Prakasha. It's one of the great Śakta texts of our tradition. And he says here, verily is she the primordial, Adi, Adho Eva Shakti, Spandana. Sheila, she is the ground of all vibrations. I'm going to translate this as, verily is she the primordial pulsation. And look at this, Bahir Vishayonmukhi, who is inclined towards externality. So she wants to project outward. That's why Sri Ramakrishna might be saying, no, Ma, no, I don't want to be pulled in. He's being pulled into samadhi. And he's saying, no, I don't want to be pulled in. Don't make me a dry monk. Because Kali is surging out of him, Bahir Vishayonmukhi, to re-engage with the world, which he now cognizes as divine. So she is that primordial pulsation, that desire, inclined towards externality. Vyapini, she is all pervasive. So that means there is nothing in this world that she is not. Hence, you can eat whatever you want. You can drink whatever you want. You can make love to whoever you want. You can live wherever you want. It doesn't matter what is pure, what is impure. Somananda says the fire in the Brahmana's house and the fire in the Chandala's house is still fire. It will cook food all the same. Similarly, the consciousness in my body and the consciousness in a Shudra's body is the same consciousness. It will cognize all the same. So there's no difference. There's no caste. There's no race. There's no gender. There's no religion. Like in truth, there is just Shakti. The Advaita of Shaktism allows for real religious pluralism, real multiculturalism, real cosmopolitanism, real LGBTQIA like values of like just being what you are without anybody telling you you can't be that, you know? Anyway, she's all pervasive. And because she's all pervasive, she's therefore the receptacle of all beings, all creation, and all wisdom. Bhajana means receptacle, upadesha means teaching, creation. So life itself is the teaching. Life itself is yoga. There is nothing here that is not God. Once Sri Ramakrishna was walking out of the pine grove where he like, goes potty, and a dog or a jackal or something followed him. And he stopped, turned around, and looked at the jackal, waiting for it to say something to him, because he trusted fully that mother could speak through the jackal also. In the same sense, mother could speak through anything in this world because everything is mother. So remember what we said about Somananda, how he saw the world as alive, like he saw the world as animate. And if we think of Shakti as the animating principle, everything has Shakti, everything is Shakti, everything is alive, everything is the Divine Mother speaking to us in each and every moment. Ekaiva chin nila dhava bhasa rupa. Now we start getting into something even subtler. And this is the last thing we're going to cover. I think the Dakshina Kali stuff I'll save for next week because it's turning out to be a 3-hour lecture and I need to. The lecture is called Who is Kali? So can you blame me? Like, this is like my whole thing, you guys. This is like, this is the whole, like, it's all downhill from here. I have nothing more to say after this, I think. This is it. This is everything I think I know or I think I've learned. So I don't know what will happen after. I don't know what we're going to do next week. But so just bear with me. I'm almost there. Ekaivachin nila dhava bhasa rupa. So abhasa. So now this one non-dual, all-pervasive reality called Shakti is in this line. Eka eva. She's going to be linked to something very important. Eka eva. She is verily. So now we know Shiva is verily Shakti. Okay, we know that. The essence of Shiva is Shakti. And this is perhaps a mystical experience that brought about this philosophical conception. But even philosophically, you can see why that should be so. And hopefully by now you're convinced that you can't have silence without at least the articulation of self-reflexivity. You can't have stillness without at least the stirring, the pulsing of inspiration. Or rather, you could instead just be convinced that it would not be valuable theologically or axiologically to posit an absolute that's no better than a pot or nothing, So coming back to this, we know that the essence of Shiva, who would otherwise be a corpse, is Shakti. And now we know that Shakti is the primordial pulsation inclined towards externality, the all-pervasive receptacle of all things in which all wisdom is held. But now we hear something even more dramatic. And she is that chin, consciousness, chit. She is that consciousness in which shines experiences like the color blue. So this is, of course, very Buddhist coded because it's not. I mean, in all the Indian schools of philosophy, Nyaya, we always get this example, the experience of the color blue, Nila Darshana. And, Nagarjuna asks a very fascinating question. How do you know, or you can't know, whether or not there is such a thing called blue outside of your perception of it? So this is the most dramatic thing I could possibly say tonight. And I've said some pretty dramatic things, but this is the rasa, this is the rahasya, this is the guhya, this is the gupta. This is it. There is nothing that you can point to that is outside of you. For everything that you experience, from the color blue all the way to Brahma, from a blade of grass up to the highest divinity, all of it is encountered within your own subjectivity. It's within your first person experiencing faculty that blue is encountered. And you have no access to anything outside of that. To even posit that there is such a thing as blue outside of your subjective experience of blue is an unfalsifiable, non-verifiable reality. Like, you can't say that because you'll never be able to prove it. And the moment you prove that there is something outside of your perception of blue, that's already part of your perception. So to posit it would be nonsensical. Why posit something that can never be verified, that can never be a subject to experience? And if it is subject to experience, it's internal. So there's no such thing as any world or reality outside of you. This is a fact. It's not a dogma that you have to believe in. Just check and see. Can you see one thing here in this room that is not included in your own subjectivity, in your own experience of the world? And that's what Kali is. And again, that's what Shiva is. Again, notice when we say that Shiva and Shakti refer to the same reality, the reality we're talking about is none other than you. Tattvamasi. What is Kali Tattva? Number 0, like Shakti is number 2, Shiva is number 1. What Tattva is Kali? Hare, Tattvamasi. Tattvamasi iti Kalihi. That thou art. This is Kali. Like Tattvam, tattvamasyādi lakshanam, like that which is indicated by the statement tattvamasi and others like aham brahmasmi and whatnot, all these mahavakyas, we're referring to one thing. And when people talk about Shiva, they always refer to it. They describe Shiva in terms of this. Hence, chid drishatmani drishtvesham, having seen the Lord as one's own self through the eye of consciousness. Now we can look to the Raudava Agama, which is a Shaiva Siddhanta dualistic text. And there you can see, look, we're talking about Shiva as consciousness. And here, look, we're talking about Kali as consciousness. So who is a Śakta? I have not yet met one. Who is a Shaiva? I've not yet met one. I've never met a Muslim. I've never met a Hindu. I've only met conscious beings. And by Allah, by Krishna, by Kali, by Shiva, we say we're all just speaking about this reality. That's the claim that we make. So there's no Śakta or Shiva. These are two words to refer to this consciousness. But now, this is the key. This is where Shakti is very important. Because you have to recognize something more about this consciousness. One more thing about this consciousness. So I am conscious, and within my conscious experience, all things appear. And now check this out. Astira hata gavati kulaeva paschat pratisanghata svabhava. Astira, it is not still. Sthira means still. Astira means it's not still. It's dynamic. Hatha, meaning almost forceful. Hatha means forceful. Gavati means going or moving outward. So this consciousness is not still or quiescent. It is forcefully pouring out and embodying itself as the kula, as the world. So every time I experience the world, it's my desire to experience the world. I myself want to interact with the world, so I project it. And then this whole world exists within me. But then here comes the key. Paschat. But then after I've had my enjoyment, after I've enjoyed whatever it is I want to enjoy, pratisanghata svabhava, I reabsorb it back into myself. So let's go all the way back to the Shiva Jnana Bodha. Remember, Rudra is defined as God because he reabsorbs. And now look, who is it that reabsorbs? Consciousness. Kali, Rudra, Shiva, they all refer to consciousness. Consciousness is that one who reabsorbs everything back into itself, having had the experience to its heart's delight. So the Mayuranda again, the peacock's egg. In consciousness is contained all possibilities. Just try and see. Right now you know what you know, right? Aren't you also aware of what you don't know? I mean, you don't know what you don't know, but you are aware that you don't know. So now we have only two things, that which is expressed and that which is yet to be expressed. And both are in you. That which is perceivable and that which is yet to be perceived. So again, think of the peacock's egg. Here we have primordial awareness, which has inherent in it latencies and potentialities, which can at any time spring into being. Now, the next claim gives you a meditative practice. Soyam nirupadho chitspayad upadhikrito bhedaha. Sa ayam. So this reality or her spontaneous nature, let's translate it this way. Her spontaneous nature is found at the very edge of any arising experience. I mean, notice, any experience that comes, try to catch that first moment when it starts to come, like when it arises. So for instance, if I take a sip of this tea, see, we can track this by becoming very subtle, very present, very attentive. Notice that first moment in which you taste the sugar or taste the milk or taste the tea. Catch her there. You'll see she's on the edge of the experience, arising from consciousness. You feel that it's coming from you, actually. The experience is arising from your own interiority and presenting itself to you as if it were some kind of external reality. And then, Rakta Kali, with delight, you rush out to interact with this experience that is shining in your subjectivity. And then notice what happens now. The taste of the tea is fading away. If you focus on the taste and follow that taste to its point of dissolution, you'll meet Kali there, in that liminal space between experience and non-experiencing. You know? Between each thought, between each word, as you move from one room to the next, during the half moon, during sexual intercourse, during the taste of chocolate, during the experience of grief or the sharp sensation of pain. It literally doesn't matter. Every single experience arises in consciousness, is savored within the subjectivity and interiority of consciousness, and dissolves back into consciousness. It's a cycle, a krama. It's at once simultaneous, and yet it is a process. It arises, it is experienced, it is devoured, it is reabsorbed, dissolved. And maybe in future it will come again. It will arise again to be re-experienced and then reabsorbed. But the potency was always within you. Nothing outside of you exists. So it can only come from you. And since nothing outside of you exists, where can the fucker go? He has to come back to the place where he came. Because nothing but that exists. And that's what we mean when we say Kālī. You know? Like, why should I worship anywhere but at the altar of Marlene, at the altar of Patrick, at the altar of Viranatha, at the altar of Caleb? Like, who cares for God? Because this is it. This is it. What else could there be but this? And so I really love this final claim that he makes here, where he's like, Cha vastu tattvam na purvam kinchit. And you know what? It's not transcendent. It's not other than what is here now. It's like not extraordinary. It's very ordinary. It's very mundane. But that's why it's so profound. It's so sacred. And that's why you don't have to give a rat's ass, a damn about what you eat or what you do or where you stay. Where can there be impurity in this world? You could touch your tongue to feast. I mean, you probably will like get very ill, and that's also cool. That's also included in the totality of her potentialities. But like, what can you do that will make you impure? Like, there's no purity. So basically, your whole life becomes sadhana. You don't have to like have a specialized form of sadhana. And that's why the Vijnana Bhairava really shines in this understanding. So she is the krama, the sequence or the process by which consciousness projects, savors, and reabsorbs. To put it simply, you can break this up to a series of 12 or 27 or 36. Like, there are many ways of understanding the krama, like 3 sets of 9 or 3 sets of 4 or 4 sets of 3. There's so many different ways that the masters of our Shaiva tradition have interpreted the krama. But Kālī is krama. So when we say Kālī krama, we're not saying, oh, the process within Kālī. We're saying, no, Kālī is process itself. The process by which things come, are savored and dissolved. It's a primordial way of thinking. Or you can really go deeper into this, but we'll just leave it there. There's 12 Kālīs and everything like that, but we'll just leave it there. So now that we know this, that she's primordial awareness, let's put one more thing in here, which is Abhinava Gupta's definition. So this is obviously like the textbook definition. If anybody asks you, what is Kālī? Like, this is the one that we often have in our back pockets to explain Kālī. The disclaimer here is that you cannot explain her. Swarupam tvadiyam na vindanti devaha. Even the gods don't understand her nature. She is the explanatory power itself. So how will you define the definer? You know, you can't do it. It's like your eyeballs trying to see itself. It won't happen. The eyeballs are the instrumentality by which you can see the things within the field of visual vision. Visual vision within the field of physical vision. But can you see your own eyeballs? No, because the instrument cannot be an instrument to itself. An object can't become a subject can't become an object to itself. A doorknob can't turn itself. A screwdriver can't screw itself. The eyeballs can't see itself. I can screw myself. I screw myself quite often, but the eyeballs can't see themselves. So similarly, you can't describe Kālī because she's the very power of description which I'm using to describe her. Tava chakachana na sutirambike. Tava chakachana na sutirambike. Sakala shabadamayi kilatedanu. Nikhila murtishu me bhavadannayo. Manasi jasu bahish prasarasucha. Eti vichintya shive shamita shive. Jagati jatama yatanava shadidam. Suti japarchana chintana varjita. Nakhalukachana kalastime. Mother, I could be talking the most mundane shit in the marketplace, or I could be praying in the temple. It makes no difference. You are every word that shines in my awareness. Whatever I see in this universe, however profane, it is you alone that I encounter. How will I speak of you, Mother, when you yourself have become the words which I use to describe you? How futile then is my worship? That's the claim, Abhinava says. Anyway, so here, Abhinava is going to try to define the definer. You can't do it. And therefore, he gives us a disclaimer. What he's trying to describe now, he calls Anakya, the nameless, the unnamed and the unnameable. So here's what he says. This is Kālī. kṣepo jñānaṁ cha saṅkhyāṁ gatināda iti kramāt. Kallanāṁ kurvatī Kālī karṣiṇīty abhidhīyate. Karṣiṇīty abhidhīyate. So she who projects kṣepana, she who knows jnana, She who delimits or who identifies or who discerns, saṅkhyāṁ. She who vibrates or she who moves, rather. She who is resonance, who is language. She who is process. She who visualizes and imagines the universe within her. She who acts. She who devours, or rather reabsorbs. This is verily Kālī. It is consciousness that projects. It is within consciousness that things are known. It is consciousness that practices saṅkhyā, neti, and says panchabhutas and panchatanmatras and karmendriyas and jnānendriyas and mano, buddhi, ahankara, chitta. It's consciousness that does that delimiting. And it's through language that consciousness delimits. And so language, the mātrikās, the mātrikās are now conceived of as powers. They're powers that could overwhelm you, or they're powers that you can integrate into your being and use because they inhere in consciousness as the delimiting power of consciousness. And they vibrate, they're resonant. And, the whole thing, we have already described the process. And the world is really internal to you. It's a kalpana. It's a vision within your own interiority. And you alone are acting, and into you it all dissolves. This is verily Kālī. Kālī, karṣiṇīty, abhidhīyate. Kālī, kala, saṅkhyāṁ is thus defined. Okay. So, we've looked at Abhinava Gupta, we've looked at Shittikanta. Hopefully now you can see that there's no difference whatsoever between Shiva and Kālī. They both mean consciousness. And hopefully you can see that that consciousness which we're talking about is not a stillness without dynamism. It's not a silence without sound. There's so much to say about the Mātrikās. I'll save it for next week, I think, and we'll just move into a Q&A. Brief note on Dakshina Kālī. Obviously, there are many forms of Kālī. But honestly, are there? Because all those forms are also perceived within Kālī. Kālī being that consciousness, that radiant void, that dynamic stillness. But if you want to say something about Dakshina Kālī, you could maybe say this. She's the boon-giving Kālī, the auspicious Kālī. But isn't that very similar to saying Shiva? When you say Shiva, you mean blessing, you mean auspiciousness. When we say Sarvam, Evam, Shivatmakam, all this is verily Shiva. Remember, it's not a proper noun. In Sanskrit, there are no proper nouns. It's not like capital S, it's just Shiva. And Shiva means blessing. So when I say all this is a blessing, when I say all this is Shiva, I'm saying all this is a blessing. So when we say Dakshina Kālī, we're saying the same thing. All of this is Kālī and all of this is Shiva. So I interpret the word Dakshina Kālī as Shiva Kālī, if you will. The Kālī who is auspicious, because Shiva is auspicious, because reality is auspicious. So the moment I say Dakshina Kālī and I define Kālī as that which creates the world, and I define Kālī as auspicious, the world must be auspicious. How can the inauspicious come from the auspicious? If this world comes from God and God is pure, then this world must be pure. Or more importantly, if consciousness is pure, then the world that appears in consciousness must be pure, being none other than consciousness. Okay, so that's the first claim. Dakshina Kālī, she gives boons. And you know what? The cancer is a boon. The house burning down is a boon. The loss of loved ones is a boon. You don't even have to think of it in terms of like, oh, overall, it will be good for my spiritual growth. No, the boon is that you get to experience it. That's it. The very fact of your being is determined by the experiences that you can have. And because you can have experiences, you can be, and that's a wonderful thing. That itself is the boon. But of course, you can look at it from a more practical point of view and say, yeah, everything that happens to help me recognize Kālī. So she's the boon-giving Kālī. Also, she destroys all death because Yamaraj, the Lord of Death, he abides in the south, in the mythological landscape of the Puranas and the Tantras and whatnot. So if Kālī is Dakshina Kālī, it means she's looking south. She's looking death right in the eyes and she's saying, not today. Leave my child alone. But what does this mean, I think, on a deeper level? I would argue that it means you're no longer identified with this limited body, having taken refuge in your true essence nature as the all-pervasive consciousness in which shines all creation and knowledge. And so what is death to you? Death is just death of a body. It's just the death of an experience. But every experience that has ended, you have survived. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm going to sip this tea right now. Oh, wow, look, an experience. Oh, wow, look, it's gone. I'm still here. Don't you think that when the body goes, the same thing will be true? Right now, I'm experiencing the body. One day, I won't be experiencing the body. So what? It's the end of an experience, but it's not the end of me. For I am the one in whom all of these kramas, all these sequences of experience and dissolution occur again and again and again. So why is she Dakshina Kālī? Why does she look to the south? She conquers death, which is what we do also when we recognize that we are pure consciousness. But also the south is an inauspicious place, a dark place. It's the place of death. Yama. So I want to close the way I began. Like with all experiences, they arise and they dissolve in the same place from which they arose, the smashan. And we'll end with that. That ultimately Kālī is always looking at the smashan. Dakshina Kālī looks south. towards inauspiciousness. And that's what we ought to do too. We should look left. We should look south. We should see all of those things that we hate, that we think are impure, and we should recognize them for what they are, God and God alone. In my boyhood, I visited a temple, one of my favorite temples where I grew up. And next to the temple is a smashan, as is the case with many Kālī temples. And the legend that was always told to me was this. They had built the murti with their eyes looking forward. Do you know? And somehow, in the middle of the night, she turned her head, the murti. And then the next day, the priest came and they were shocked to find this miracle that in the inner shrine, the murti had turned her head so that she could look towards the smashan, her favorite place. And so if you come here to our home, you'll see Kāli's eyes are painted, but she's not looking at the worshipper. She's looking over to the smashan, as if beckoning you, inviting you. Don't look at me. I am not an object to be seen. I am the power by which you see. And let me show you something really cool. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanam Astu Shri Sarada Arpanam Astu Shri Kālī Arpanam Astu Jai Shri Shri Siddheshwari Sarva Siddhi Pradayini Bhairava Yogini Smashanavasini Kālī Mai ki Jai Namo Parvati Pataye Har Har Mahadev.